Jack London. Smoke Bellew. The Taste of the Meat. In the beginning, he was Christopher Bellew. At college, he became Chris Bellew. Later, in the bohemian crowd of San Francisco, he was called Kit Bellew. And in the end, he was known by name Smoke Bellew. This is the history of his and his name evolution. First, he received a letter from Bellew from Paris. "I've just seen a copy of the Billow," Gillet wrote. "O'Hara will succeed with it. But—" Here followed details in the improvement of the Society Weekly magazine. "Go and see him. Tell they are your own suggestions, not from me. I can't afford working for him, because I get real money for my stuff from the big magazines. Make him fire the fool who's doing the musical and art criticism. San Francisco should have a literature of her own. Tell him to find somebody to write a live serial, and to put into it the real romance and glamour and colour of San Francisco." Kit Bellew went to the office of the Billow. O'Hara listened, debated, agreed. When O'Hara wanted anything, no friend could deny him. He was sweetly irresistible. When Kit escaped from the office, he had become an associate editor, had agreed to write weekly columns of criticism, and had promised to write 10,000 words on the San Francisco serial a week. And all this without pay. The Billow wasn't profitable yet, O'Hara explained, and convinced Kit Bellew that he was the only one man in San Francisco capable of writing the serial. That's how his servitude to O'Hara and the Billow had begun. Week after week he occupied an office chair, got rid of creditors, argued with printers, and wrote 25,000 words of all sorts. The Billow went in for illustration. The processes were expensive. It never had any money to pay Kit Bellew. "This is what comes of being a good fellow," Kit complained. "Thank God for good fellows, then," O'Hara cried with tears in his eyes. "You're all that saved me, Kit. Just a little longer, old man, and things will be easier." "Never," Kit thought. "I see my fate. I'll be here always." A little later, he tried his way out. In O'Hara's presence, he fell over a chair. A few minutes afterwards, he crushed into the corner of the desk. Kit brushed his eyes with his hands and peered about him. "It's my eyes. There's something wrong with them." For several days he continued to fall over and bump into the office furniture. But O'Hara's heart was not softened. "You've got to see an oculist," he said one day. "There's Dr. Hasdapple, and it won't cost you anything. We can get it for advertising." "There's nothing the matter with your eyes," was the doctor's verdict. "In fact, your eyes are magnificent. Pair in a million." "Don't tell O'Hara," Kit asked. "And give me a pair of black glasses." O'Hara sympathized and talked of the time when the Billow would be on its feet. Luckily for Kit Bellew, he had his own income. It was small, but it let him belong to several clubs and have a studio in the Latin Quarter. Now he had no time to spend money. Yet he was always broke, for the Billow absorbed his cash as well as his brains. There were the illustrators, who periodically refused to illustrate, the printers, who periodically refused to print, and the office boy, who frequently refused to officiate. At such times O'Hara looked at Kit, and Kit did the rest. When the steamship Excelsior arrived from Alaska, bringing the news of the Klondike strike that set the country mad, Kit made careless proposition. "Look here, O'Hara," he said, "this gold rush is going to be big. Suppose I cover it for the Billow. I'll pay my own expenses." O'Hara shook his head. "Can't let you from the office, Kit. Then there's that cereal. Besides, Jackson is starting for the Klondike tomorrow, and he's agreed to send a weekly letter and photos." The next Kit heard of the Klondike was when he came to the club that afternoon, and saw there his uncle. "Hello, Uncle," Kit greeted. "Won't you join me?" He ordered a cocktail, but the uncle drank only thin claret. He glanced with disapproval at the cocktail and onto his nephew's face. Kit saw a lecture gathering. "I've only a minute," he said quickly. "I've got to run to that Keith exhibition and do half a column on it." "What's the matter with you?" the other demanded. "You're pale. You're a wreck. I'll have the pleasure of burying you, I can see that." Kit shook his head sadly. "No, thank you. Cremation for me." John Bellew came of the old hard crowd that had crossed the plains by ox-team in the 50s, and in him was the hardness of a childhood spent in the conquering of a new land. "You're not living right, Christopher. I'm ashamed of you." "I'm not making merry. I have no time." "Then what in—" "Overwork." John Bellew laughed harshly. "Overwork? You've never earned a cent in your life." "I have, only I never got it. I'm earning $500 a week right now and doing 4 men's work." "Pictures that won't sell? Or, fancy work of some sort? Can you swim?" "I used to." "Sit a horse?" "I have tried that adventure." John Bellew showed his disgust. "I'm glad your father didn't live to see you now," he said. "Your father was a man, every inch of him. Do you get it? You're a failure. What pictures have you painted? Plain watercolours and nightmare posters. You've never had one exhibited, even here in San Francisco." "Ah, you forget. There is one in the room of this very club." "A cartoon? Music? Your dear fool of a mother spent hundreds on lessons. You failed. You've never earned a $5 piece by accompanying someone at a concert. Your songs? Ragtime rot that's never printed, and that's sung only by a pack of fake bohemians." "I had a book published once. Those sonnets, you remember?" Kit interrupted. "What did it cost you?" "Only a couple of $100. "Any other achievements?" "I had a forest play acted at the Summer Theatre." "What did you get for it?" "Glory." John Bellew set his glass down with the unnecessary violence. "What earthly good are you, anyway? You were well provided for, yet even at university you didn't play football. You didn't row. You didn't—" "I boxed and fenced. Some." "When did you box last?" "Not since, but I was considered an excellent judge of time and distance, only I was, lazy. My father, sir, your grandfather, old Isaac Billow, killed a man with a blow of his fist when he was 69 years old, but you'll never kill a mosquito at 69. Times have changed, Uncle. They send men to prison for homicide now." "How old are you?" I know 27. You finished college at 22. You played for 5 years. Before God and man, of what use are you?" "When I was your age, I had one suit of underclothes. I was riding with the cattle in Coluso. I was hard as rocks. I could sleep on a rock. I lived on jerked beef and bear meat. I'm a better man physically right now than you are. You weigh about 165. I can throw you right now or fight you with my fists." "Don't you see, Uncle, the times have changed?" Kit murmured. "Besides, I wasn't brought up right. My mother was too good to me, kept me in cotton wool, all the rest. Why didn't you invite me sometimes on those intensely masculine vacations you go in for? You took Hal and Robbie all over the Sierras and on that Mexico trip." "I guess you were milksop." "Your fault, Uncle, and my dear mother's. I was only a child. What was there left but etchings and pictures and fans? Was it my fault that I never had it to sweat?" The older man looked at his nephew with unconcealed disgust. He had no patience with softness. "Well, I'm going to take another one of those what-you-call-it masculine vacations. Suppose I asked you to come along?" "Where is it?" "Hal and Robert are going into Klondike, and I'm going to see them across the pass and down to the lakes, then return." The young man sprang forward and gripped his hand. "My preserver!" John Bellew was immediately suspicious. He had not dreamed the invitation would be accepted. "You don't mean it," he said. "When do we start?" "It'll be a hard trip. You'll be in the way." "No, I won't. I'll work. I've learned to work since I went on the Billow." "Each man has to take a year's supply with him. There'll be such a jam the Indian packers won't be able to handle it. Hal and Robert will have to carry their outfits themselves. That's why I'm going too, to help them pack. If you come, you'll have to carry the same weight." "Watch me." "You can't pack," was the objection. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow." "I just have to get away somewhere, anywhere from O'Hara," Kit said at parting. "Who is O'Hara, a Jap?" "No, he's an Irishman, and a slave driver, and my best friend. He's the editor and owner and all-round VIP of the Billow. He can make ghosts walk." That night, Kit Bellew wrote a note to O'Hara. "It's only a several weeks' vacation," he explained. "You'll have to get somebody to write for that serial. Sorry, old man, but my health demands it. I'll work twice as hard when I get back." Kit Bellew landed on the madness of the dire beach, heaped up with 1,000-pound outfits of thousands of men. This immense mass of luggage and food, flung ashore in mountains by the steamers, was beginning slowly to escape up the Dai Valley and across Chilkoot. Travellers had to carry their supplies on their backs for 28 miles. Despite the fact that the Indian packers had raised the freight from 8 cents a pound to 40, they had too much work, and it was clear that winter would catch the major portion of the outfits on the wrong side of the divide. Kit was the least adapted of the newcomers. Like many, he carried a big revolver on a cartridge belt. His uncle, filled with memories of old lawless days, provided him with it, but Kit Bellew was romantic. He viewed the gold rush with an artist's eye. He did not take life seriously. He was merely on a vacation, and intended to see the pass and then to return. Leaving his party on the sand to wait for the putting ashore of the freight, he strolled up the beach toward the old trading post. A 6-foot Indian passed him, carrying an unusually large pack. Kit admired the grace and ease with which he moved along under his burden. The Indian dropped his pack on the scales in front of the post. The pack weighed 125 pounds, which fact was noted in tones of awe. Kit wondered if he could lift such a weight, much less walk off with it. A young woman standing in the doorway caught his eye. What struck him was a feeling that somehow she belonged to the place. The bright beauty and colour of her oval face held him, and he looked overlong, till her own eyes, long-lashed and dark, met his in cool survey. From his face they travelled in evident amusement down to the big revolver at his thigh. In her eyes was contempt. It struck him like a blow. She turned to the man beside her and pointed at Kit. "Chechako," the girl said. The man looked like a tramp in his cheap overalls and old woolen jacket. He smiled dryly, and Kit felt humiliated. He noted the way of the girl's walk, and thought that he would recognize it in 1,000 years. Kit's neighbor said, "Caribou Charlie. He was lucky on Klondike, old-timer. Been on the Yukon a dozen years. He's just come back." "What's Chechako mean?" Kit asked. "Tenderfoot." Kit decided to check his own strength. He picked out a sack of flour which weighed 100 pounds. He reached down and tried to get it onto his shoulder. It was real heavy, and his back was weak. With an oath, at the end of 5 minutes, he collapsed on top of the burden. He mopped his forehead, and across a heap of sacks saw John Bellew looking at him. "God!" proclaimed the apostle of the hard. "When I was 16 I toyed with things like that." "You forget, Uncle," Kit answered, "that I wasn't raised on bear meat. and I'll toy with it when I'm 60. You've got to show me." John Bellew did. He was 48, but he bent over the sack, balanced it, and, with a quick movement, stood erect, the somersaulted sack of flour on his shoulder. "Skill, my boy, and a spine." Kit took off his hat. "You're a wonder, Uncle. Do you think I can learn the skill?" John Bellew shrugged his shoulders. "You'll run back home before we get started." "No fear of that," Kit groaned. "There's O'Hara, the roaring lion, down there. I'm not going back till I have to." Kit's first pack was a success. Up to Finnegan's Crossing, they had managed to get Indians to carry the 2,500-pound outfit. From that point, their own backs must do the work. They planned to move forward at the rate of a mile a day. It looked easy, on paper. John Bellew was to stay in camp and do the cooking. So each of the 3 young men had the task of carrying 800 pounds 1 mile each day. If they made 50-pound packs, it meant a daily walk of 16 miles loaded, and of 15 miles light. "Because we don't go back the last time," Kit explained the pleasant discovery. 80-pound packs meant 19 miles travel each day, and 100-pound packs meant only 15 miles. "I don't like walking," said Kit. "I'll carry 100 pounds. He caught the smile of disbelief on his uncle's face and quickly added, "Of course, I'll learn first. I'll start with 50. He did, and strolled happily along the trail. He dropped the sack at the next campsite and strolled back. It was easier than he had thought, but 2 miles had rubbed off the velvet of his strength. His second pack was 65 pounds. It was more difficult, and he no longer strolled. Several times, following the custom of all packers, he sat down on the ground, resting the pack behind him on a rock. With the third pack he became bold. He fastened the straps to a 95-pound sack of beans and started. At the end of 100 yards he felt that he must collapse. He sat down and mopped his face. "Short walks and short rests," he muttered. "That's the trick." Sometimes he did not make 100 yards, and each time he struggled to his feet for another short walk, the pack became heavier. He panted for breath, and the sweat streamed from him. Before he had covered 1/4 of a mile, he took off his woolen shirt and hung it on a tree. A little later he got rid of his hat. At the end of half a mile he decided he was finished. He had never worked so hard in his life. As he sat and panted, he looked at the big revolver and the heavy cartridge belt. 10 pounds of junk! He threw it into the bush. His short hauls decreased. At times 100 feet was all he could make, and his rests grew longer. But his mind was busy. It was a 28-mile portage, which represented as many days, and this was the easiest part of it. "Wait till you get to Chilkoot," others told him as they rested and talked, "where you climb with hands and feet." A slip, and he felt that everything inside him had been torn. "If ever I fall down with this on my back, I'm a goner," he told another packer. "That's nothing," came the answer. "Wait till you hit the canyon. You'll have to cross a torrent on a 60-foot pine tree. No guide ropes, nothing, and the water boiling to your knees. If you fall with the pack on your back, there's no getting out of the straps. You just stay there and drown." He and the sack of beans became a walking tragedy. It reminded him of the old man who sat on Sinbad's neck. And this was one of those intensely masculine vacations. Compared with it, the servitude to O'Hara was sweet. Again and again he was nearly seduced by the thought of leaving the sack of beans and of sneaking around the camp to the beach and catching a steamer for civilization. But he didn't. Somewhere in him was the strain of the hard, and he repeated over and over to himself that what other men could do, he could. It became a nightmare. At other times, resting, he watched and envied the Indians who walked under heavier packs. They never seemed to rest, but went on and on. He sat and cursed, then took to crying. There were tears of exhaustion and of disgust with self. If ever a man was a wreck, he was. As the end of the pack came in sight, he pitched forward on his face, the beans on his back. It did not kill him, but he lay for 15 minutes before he could gather enough strength to release himself from the straps. Then he became sick, and was so found by Robbie, who had similar troubles of his own. It was this sickness of Robbie that cheered Kit up. "What other men can do, we can do," Kit told Robbie. "I'm 27 years old and a man," he privately assured himself many times in the days that followed. There was need for it. At the end of the week he had lost 15 pounds of his own weight. His face was thin and haggard. He had become a work animal. He fell asleep over his food, and his sleep was heavy. Sometimes he was aroused, screaming with agony, by the cramps in his legs. Every part of him ached. He received fearful bruising of his feet on the water-rounded rocks of the Dai flats. He washed his face once a day. His nails, torn and broken, were never cleaned. His shoulders and chest, rubbed sore by the pack-straps, made him think, and for the first time, with understanding, of the horses he had seen on city streets. What nearly destroyed him at first had been the food. The extraordinary amount of work demanded extraordinary eating, and his stomach was unaccustomed to great quantities of bacon and the coarse brown beans. As a result, his stomach went back on him, and for several days the pain and irritation of it and of starvation nearly broke him down. And then came the day of joy, when he could eat like a ravenous animal and, wolf-eyed, ask for more. Later they made a change in their plans. Word had come across the pass that at Lake Lindeman the last available trees for building boats were being cut. The two cousins, with tools, blankets, and grub on their backs, went on, leaving Kit and his uncle to hustle along the outfit. John Bellew now shared the cooking with Kit, and both packed shoulder to shoulder. Time was flying, and on the peaks the first snow was falling. To be caught on the wrong side of the pass meant a delay of nearly a year. The older man put his iron back under 100 pounds. Kit was shocked, but he gritted his teeth and fastened his own straps to 100 pounds. It hurt, but his body, devoid of all softness and fat, was beginning to harden up with lean muscle. Also, he observed and learned. He took note of the head straps worn by the Indians and made one for himself, which he used in addition to the shoulder straps. It made things easier, so that he began the practice of piling any light, cumbersome piece of luggage on top. Thus he was soon able to bend along with 100 pounds in the straps, 15 or 20 more lying loosely on top of the pack and against his neck, an axe or a pair of oars in one hand, and in the other cooking pails of the camp. But the work grew harder. The trail was more rugged, their packs grew heavier, and each day saw the snow line dropping down the mountains, while freight jumped to 60 cents. No word came from the cousins beyond, so they knew they must be at work chopping down the standing trees and making boat planks. John Bellew grew anxious. He persuaded a bunch of Indians to put their straps on the outfit. They charged 30 cents a pound to carry it to the summit of Chilkoot, and it nearly broke him. Some 400 pounds of clothes bags and camp outfit were left. he remained behind to move it along, sending Kit with the Indians. At the summit, Kit was to remain, slowly moving his ton until overtaken by the 400 pounds with which his uncle guaranteed to catch him. Kit went along the trail with his Indian packers. It was a long pack, and his own load was only 80 pounds. The Indians walked quicker, but by now he felt himself almost equal of an Indian. At the end of a quarter of a mile he wanted to rest, but the Indians kept on. He stayed with them and kept his place in the line. At the half-mile he was sure he couldn't do another step, yet he gritted his teeth, kept his place, and at the end of the mile was amazed that he was still alive. Then, in some strange way, came the thing called second wind, and the next mile was almost easier than the first. The third mile nearly killed him, but, though half dead with pain and fatigue, he never complained. And then came the rest. Instead of sitting in the straps, as was the custom of white packers, the Indians slipped out of the shoulder and head straps and lay at ease, talking and smoking. A full half-hour passed before they made another start. To Kit's surprise, he found himself a fresh man, and long hauls and long rests became his newest motto. The pitch of Chilkoot was all he had heard of it, and many times he climbed with hands as well as feet. But when he reached the destination, it was in the company of his Indians, and his secret pride was that he had come through with them. To be almost as good as an Indian was his new ambition. When he had paid off the Indians and seen them depart, a stormy darkness was falling, and he was left alone, 1,000 feet above tree-line, on the backbone of the mountain. He was wet to the waist, hungry and exhausted, and dreamed of a fire and a cup of coffee. Instead, he ate 6 cold pancakes and crawled into the folds of the partly unrolled tent. Falling asleep, he had time for only one thought, and he smiled at the picture of John Bellew carrying his 400 pounds up Chilkoot. As for himself, even though loaded with 2,000 pounds, he was to go down the hill. In the morning, stiff from his labours and numb with the frost, he rolled out of the canvas, ate a couple of pounds of uncooked bacon, tied the straps on 100 pounds, and went down the rocky way. The trail led across a small glacier and down to Crater Lake. Other men packed across the glacier. All that day he dropped his packs at the glacier's upper edge. He was astonished at being able to do 150 pounds each load. For $2 he bought from an Indian 3 hard biscuits, and out of these and a huge quantity of raw bacon made several meals. Unwashed, unwarmed, his clothing wet with sweat, he slept another night in the canvas. In the early morning he spread a tarpaulin on the ice, loaded it with 3/4 of a ton, and started to pull. Downward the glacier his load accelerated, overran him, and brought him on top, and ran away with him. 100 packers bending under their load stopped to watch. He shouted frantic warnings, and those in his path cleared away. Below, on the lower edge of the glacier, was a small tent, which seemed jumping toward him. So rapidly it grew larger. He left the beaten track and struck a patch of fresh snow. He saw the tent the instant he struck it, carrying away the corner sticks and appearing inside, still on top of the tarpaulin. The tent rocked, and he found himself face to face with a shocked young woman who was sitting up in her blankets, the very one who had called him a tenderfoot at Dai. "Did you see my smoke?" he asked cheerfully. She looked at him with disapproval. "Talk about your magic carpets," he went on. "Do you mind removing that sack from my foot?" she said coldly. He looked and lifted his weight quickly. "It wasn't a sack, it was my elbow, pardon me." "It was a mercy you did not overturn the stove," she said. He followed her glance and saw a sheet-iron stove and a coffee-pot. He smelled the coffee and looked back at the girl. "I'm a Chichako," he said. "I've thrown away my revolver." Then she recognized him, and her eyes lighted. "I never thought you'd get this far," she informed him. Again, and greedily, he sniffed the air. "I can't believe it! Coffee!" He turned and directly addressed her. "I'll give you my little finger. Cut it off right now. I'll do anything. I'll be your slave for a year and a day, or any other time, if you'll give me a cup out of that pot." And over the coffee he gave his name and learned hers, Joy Gastel. Also, he learned that she was an old-timer in the country. She had been born in a trading post on the Great Slave, and, as a child, had crossed the Rockies with her father and come down to the Yukon. She was going in, she said, with her father, who had been delayed by business in Seattle. He did not make it a long conversation, and, heroically refusing a second cup of coffee, he removed himself and his baggage from her tent. He made several conclusions. She had a catching name and catching eyes, could not be more than 20 or 21 or 2. Her father must be French. She had a will of her own and burning temperament, and she had been educated elsewhere than on the frontier. The trail ran around Crater Lake and led on to Happy Camp. To pack his heavy outfit around would take days of heartbreaking work. On the lake was a canvas boat employed in freighting. 2 trips with it in 2 hours would see him and his ton across. But he was broke, and the ferryman charged $40 a ton. "You've got a gold mine, my friend, in that boat," Kit said to the ferryman. "Do you want another gold mine?" "Show me," was the answer. "I'll sell it to you for the price of ferrying my outfit. It's an idea, not patented, and you can have the deal as soon as I tell it to you. Do you agree?" The ferryman said he did. "Very well. You see that glacier? Take a pickaxe and cut into it. In a day you can have a decent channel from top to bottom. You can charge 50 cents a hundred, get 100 tons a day, and have no work to do but collect the coin." 2 hours later, Kit's ton was across the lake, and he had got 3 days for himself. And when John Bellew overtook him, he was well along toward Deep Lake, another volcanic pit filled with glacial water. The last pack, from Long Lake to Lindeman, was 3 miles, and the trail, if trail it could be called, rose up over 1,000-foot mountain range, dropped down a mess of slippery rocks, and crossed a wide stretch of swamp. John Bellew protested when he saw Kit arise with 100 pounds in the straps and pick up a 50-pound sack of flour and place it on top of the pack against the back of his neck. "Come on, you child of the hard," Kit reacted. "Show what your bear meat and your one suit of underclothes taught you." But John Bellew shook his head. "I'm afraid I'm getting old, Christopher." "You're only 48. Do you realize that my grandfather, sir, your father, old Isaac Bellew, killed a man with his fist when he was 69 years old?" John Bellew grinned. "Uncle, I want to tell you something important. I was raised a tenderfoot, but I can outpack you, outwalk you, put you on your back, or fight you with my fists right now." John Bellew spoke solemnly. "Christopher, my boy, I believe you can do it with that pack on your back at the same time. You've made good, boy, though it's too unthinkable to believe." Kit made the round trip of the last pack 4 times a day, which is to say that he daily covered 24 miles of mountain climbing, 12 miles of it under 150 pounds. He was proud, hard, and tired, but in splendid physical condition. He ate and slept as he had never eaten and slept in his life, and, as the end of the work came in sight, he was almost half sorry. One problem bothered him. He had learned that he could fall with 100 weight on his back and survive, but he was sure of that. If he fell with the additional 50 pounds across the back of his neck, it would break it. Each trail through the swamp quickly turned bottomless by the thousands of packers who had to make new trails. It was while exploring such a new trail that he solved the problem of the extra 50. The soft surface gave way under him. He slipped and pitched forward on his face. The 50 pounds crushed his face into the mud and flew forward without breaking his neck. With the remaining 100 pounds on his back, he arose on hands and knees, but he got no farther. One arm sank to the shoulder, putting his cheek in the mud. As he drew this arm out, the other sank to the shoulder. In this position it was impossible to slip the straps, and the 100 weight on his back would not let him rise. On hands and knees, sinking first one arm and then the other, he made an effort to crawl to where a small sack of flour had fallen, but he exhausted himself without advancing, and so broke the grass surface, that a tiny pool of water began to form dangerously close to his mouth and nose. He tried to throw himself on his back, with the pack underneath, but this resulted in sinking both arms to the shoulders and gave him a feeling of drowning. With patience, he slowly withdrew one sucking arm, and then the other, and rested them flat on the surface for support of his chin. Then he began to call for help. After a time he heard the sound of feet splashing through the mud as someone advanced from behind. "Lend a hand, friend," he said. "Throw out a lifeline or something." It was a woman's voice that answered, and he recognized it. "If you undo the straps, I can get up." The 100 pounds rolled into the mud, and he slowly stood up. "A pretty situation." Miss Gaskell laughed at the sight of his mud-covered face. "Not at all," he replied lightly. "My favourite physical exercise. Try it sometime. It's great for the chest muscles and spine." He wiped his face, shaking the mud from his hand. "Oh," she cried in recognition, "it's Mr. Smoke Bellew." "I thank you for your timely rescue, and for that name," he answered. "I have been doubly baptized. Since now I'll insist always on being called Smoke Bellew. It's a strong name, and not without significance." He paused, and then voice and expression became suddenly angry. "Do you know what I'm going to do?" he demanded. "I'm going back to the States. I'm going to get married. I'm going to raise a large family of children, and then, as the evening shadows fall, I'll gather those children about me and tell about the sufferings and hardships I bore on the Chilkoot Trail. And if they don't cry, I repeat, if they don't cry, I'll beat them black and blue." The Arctic winter came. Snow that had come to stay lay 6 inches on the ground, and the ice was forming in quiet ponds. It was in the late afternoon that Kit and John Bellew helped the cousins load the boat and watched it disappear down the lake in a snowstorm. "And now a night's sleep and an early start in the morning," said John Bellew. "If we aren't delayed by storm, we'll make Dyea tomorrow night, and if we have luck in catching a steamer, we'll be in San Francisco in a week." "Enjoyed your vacation?" Kit asked absently. Their camp for that last night at Lindeman was a melancholy place. Everything of use, including the tent, had been taken by the cousins. A torn tarpaulin partially sheltered them from the driving snow. They cooked supper on an open fire. All that was left of them were their blankets and food for several meals. From the moment of the departure of the boat, Kit had become absent and restless. His uncle noticed his condition and thought it was because of the end of the hard work. Only once during supper Kit spoke. "Uncle," he said, "after this I wish you'd call me Smoke." A few minutes later he went away in the direction of the village of tents that sheltered the gold rushers who were still packing or building their boats. He was gone several hours, and when he returned and slipped into his blankets, John Bellew was asleep. In the darkness of morning, Kit crawled out, built a fire, then boiled coffee and fried bacon. It was a chilly, miserable meal. As soon as it was finished, they strapped their blankets. As John Bellew turned to lead the way towards Chilkoot Trail, Kit held out his hand. "Goodbye, Uncle," he said. John Bellew looked at him in surprise. "Don't forget, my name's Smoke," Kit said. "But what are you going to do?" Kit waved his hand northward to the lake. "What's the good of turning back after getting this far?" he asked. "Besides, I've got my taste of meat, and I like it. I'm going on." "You're broke," protested John Bellew. "You have no outfit." "I've got a job. Your nephew, Christopher Smoke Bellew, is a gentleman's servant. He's got a job at $150 per month, and food. He's going down to Dawson with a couple of guys and another gentleman's man, camp cook, boatman, and general all-round helper. And O'Hara and the Billow can go to the devil. Goodbye." But John Bellew could only mutter, "I don't understand." "They say grizzlies are common in the Yukon Basin," Kit explained. "Well, I've got only one suit of underclothes, and I'm going after the bear meat. That's all." The meat. The wind blew a gale, and Smoke Bellew staggered against it along the beach. Boats were loaded with outfits, packed across Chilkoot. They were clumsy boats made by men who were not boat builders, out of green trees. One boat, already loaded, was just starting, and Kit paused to watch. The wind here blew on the beach, making up a nasty sea in the shallows. The men walked in high rubber boots as they pushed it out towards deeper water. Twice they did this. The boat was swept back and grounded. Kit noticed that the spray on the sides of the boat quickly turned to ice. The third time, men were wet to their waists, but the boat was afloat. They struggled at the heavy oars and slowly worked offshore. Then they raised a sail made of blankets, and were swept back onto the freezing beach. This was what Kit must expect to encounter. Everywhere men were at work, for the coming winter made it a gamble whether or not they would get across the great chain of lakes before the freeze-up. Yet, when Kit arrived at the tent of Messrs. Sprague and Stein, he did not find them moving. By a fire sat a short, thick man, smoking a brown paper cigarette. "Hello," he said. "Are you Mr. Sprague's new man?" Kit was sure of a hint of a grin. "Well, I'm Doc Stein's man," the other went on. "I'm 5 feet 2 inches long, and my name's Shorty." Kit put out his hand and shook. "Were you raised on bear meat?" he asked. "Sure," was the answer, "though my first feeding was a buffalo milk, as I can remember. Sit down and have some grub. The bosses haven't appeared yet." And despite the one breakfast, Kit sat down under the tarpaulin and ate a second breakfast. The hard work of weeks had given him the stomach and appetite of a wolf. He could eat anything, in any quantity. He found Shorty chatty and pessimistic, and from him he received surprising tips about their bosses and bad forecasts of the expedition. Thomas Stanley Sprague was a mining engineer and the son of a millionaire. Dr. Adolph Stein was also the son of a wealthy father, and, through their fathers, both had been backed by an investing syndicate in the Klondike adventure. "Ah, they're sure made of money," Shorty said. "When they came to Dyer, freight was 70 cents, but no Indians. There was a party from eastern Oregon, real miners, that managed to get a team of Indians together at 70 cents. Indians had the straps on the outfit, 3,000 pounds of it, when along comes Sprague and Stein. They offered 80 cents, and 90, and at $1 a pound the Indians took off their straps. Sprague and Stein came through, though it cost them 3,000, and the Oregon crowd is still on the beach. They won't get through till next year. They never mind other folks' feelings. In Lindeman, the carpenters were finishing the boat they'd contracted to Frisco guys for 600. Sprague and Stein gave them an even 1,000, and they tore their contract. It's a good-looking boat, but other guys stuck for next year. Have another cup of coffee, and take it from me that I wouldn't go with them if I didn't want to get to Klondike. They don't have the heart. Did you sign a contract?" Kit shook his head. "Then I'm sorry for you, partner. There isn't grub in the country, and they'll throw you away as soon as they reach Dawson. Men are going to starve here this winter." "They agreed," Kit began. Verbal, Shorty cut him short. "It's your word against theirs, that's all. Well, anyway, what's your name, partner?" "Call me Smoke," said Kit. "Well, Smoke, you'll have to work for your verbal contract just the same. They can sure shed money, but they can't work, or turn out of bed in the morning. It was time to start an hour ago. It's you and me for the big work. Soon you'll hear them shouting for their coffee, in bed, mind you, and they're grown men. What do ye know about boating? I'm a cowman and a prospector, but I'm sure tenderfoot on water. What do ye know?" "Nothing," Kit answered. "I haven't been on a small boat since a boy. But I guess we can learn." "Oh, we can learn all right," Shorty muttered, "but we don't even get started today." It was 8 o'clock when the call for coffee came from the tent, and nearly 9 before the two employers emerged. "Hello," said Sprague, a rosy-cheeked, well-fed young man of 25. "Time we made a start, Shorty. You and Smoke. Well, Shorty, you and Mr. Smoke had better begin loading the boat." Sprague strolled away among the tents, followed by Dr. Stein, a thin, pale young man. Shorty looked significantly at his companion. "Over 1.5 tons of outfit, and they won't help us, you see." "It's because we're paid to do the work," Kit answered cheerfully. To move 3,000 pounds on the shoulders 100 yards was no easy task, and to do it in a gale, through the snow in heavy rubber boots, was exhausting. By 2 o'clock it had all been done, and Kit, despite his 2 breakfasts, was weak with hunger. Shorty found a big pot of cold boiled beans in which there were large pieces of bacon. There was only 1 long-handled spoon, and they dipped, turn and turn about, into the pot. Kit felt that in all his life he'd never tasted anything so good. Sprague and Stein arrived in the midst of this pleasant occupation. "What's the delay?" Sprague complained. "Aren't we going to get started?" Neither Shorty nor Kit spoke till the pot was empty. "Of course we haven't been doing anything," Shorty said, "and of course you haven't had anything to eat. It was careless of me." Yes, Stein said quickly. "We ate at one of the tents, friends of ours, but now let us get started." "The boat is loaded," said Shorty. The employers got on board, while Kit and Shorty pushed. When the waves reached the tops of their boots they clambered in. The other 2 men were not prepared with the oars, and the boat swept back and grounded. 6 times this was repeated. Shorty sat down and took a chew of tobacco, while Kit bailed the boat, and the other 2 exchanged unkind remarks. "If you take my orders, I'll get her off," Sprague said finally. Before he could clamber on board, he was wet to the waist. "We've got to camp and build a fire," he said, as the boat grounded again. "I'm freezing." "Don't be afraid of a wetting," Stein sneered. "Other men have gone off today, wetter than you. Now I'm going to take her out." This time it was he who said with clattering teeth the need of a fire. "Shorty, dig out my clothes bag and make a fire," he commanded. "You'll do nothing of the sort," Sprague cried. Shorty looked from one to the other but did not move. "He's working for me, and I guess he obeys my orders," Stein argued. Shorty obeyed, and Sprague shivered in the boat. Kit had no orders and was glad of the rest. Then his employer surrendered. "Get out my bag, Smoke," he ordered, "and help with that fire. We won't get off till morning now." Next day the gale still blew. "I think I can get her off," Kit said, when all was ready for the start. Stein snapped at him, and he didn't go on. It was the first time he had worked for wages in his life, but he was learning the discipline of it fast. "How would you go about it?" Sprague finally panted. "Sit down and get a good rest till a lull comes in the wind, and then try with all your might." The idea was simple, but it worked at once, and they hoisted a blanket to the mast and sped down the lake. Stein and Sprague immediately became cheerful. Shorty was always cheerful, and Kit was too interested to be otherwise. Sprague struggled with steering, and then Kit relieved him. "My arms are nearly broken with the strain of it," Sprague muttered apologetically. Kit steered the length of Lindeman, displaying a skill that caused both young men of money to name him boat steerer. Shorty was no less pleased, and volunteered to continue cooking and leave the boat work to the other. But when it came to packing the outfit, Stein and Sprague disappeared, and their men spent 2 days of back-breaking toil in getting the outfit across. And this was the history of many miserable days of the trip, Kit and Shorty working to exhaustion while their masters did not work and demanded to be served. But the iron-bound Arctic winter continued to close down, and they were held back by numerous and unavoidable delays. At Windy Arm, Stein took steering and within the hour wrecked the boat on a shore. 2 days were lost here in making repairs, and in the morning of the fresh start, on stern and bow, in large letters, was charcoaled, "The Chechako." "Ha!" said Shorty, when accused by Stein. "I can sure read and spell, but my education never went high enough to write that." The employers felt the insult, and Kit didn't mention that the night before Shorty had asked him how to write that particular word. Kit felt disapproval of the two masters. It was not so much irritation as disgust. He thanked God that he was not made as they, and came to dislike them to a degree that bordered on hatred. They came to the rapids, first the Box Canyon, and several miles below the White Horse. The Box Canyon was a trap. Once in it, the only way out was through. On either side arose perpendicular walls of rock. The river roared through this gloomy passage in a madness of motion. The canyon was well feared, for it had collected its toll of dead from the passing gold rushers. Kit and his companions went ahead on foot to investigate. They crawled to the brink and looked down at the swirl of water. Sprague shuddered. "My God, a swimmer hasn't a chance in that!" Kit didn't hear. This glimpse of what was below him acted as a challenge. "We've got to ride that ridge," he said. "If we get off it, we'll hit the walls." "And never know what hit us," was Shorty's verdict. "Can you swim, Smoke?" "It's no use in there." "I wish I were through it," a stranger, standing alongside and peering down into the canyon, said mournfully. "I wouldn't sell my chance to go through," Kit answered. He spoke honestly. "Are you going to try?" the man asked. Kit nodded. "I wish I could get the courage to," the other confessed. "The longer I look, the more afraid I am. I'm not a boatman, and I have with me only my nephew, who is a young boy, and my wife. If you get through safely, will you run my boat through?" Kit looked at Shorty. "Sure," Shorty affirmed. Again they turned to go, but Sprague and Stein made no movement. "Good luck, Smoke," Sprague called to him. He hesitated. "I'll just stay here and watch you." "We can do without them," Kit said to Shorty. "You take the bow with a paddle, and I'll handle the steering. Once we're started, you won't be able to hear me, so just go on keeping her straight." From the canyon came an ever-growing roar. The boat jumped on the ridge, and they were half swept with flying spray. At times Kit could not see his comrade at the bow. It was only a matter of 2 minutes, in which time they rode the ridge 3/4 of a mile and emerged in safety and tied to the bank. "That was bear meat," Shorty exulted. "The real bear meat. Smoke, I tell you that before we started I was more afraid than any man this side of the Rocky Mountains. Now I'm a bear-eater. Come on and we'll run that other boat through." Midway back, on foot, they saw their employers, who had watched the passage from above. "There come the fish-eaters," said Shorty. After they run the stranger's, his name was Breck, boat through, Breck himself tried to hand Kit $50, and then attempted it on Shorty. "Stranger," was his rejection, "I come into this country to make money out of the ground, and not out of my fellows." Breck produced a bottle of whiskey. Shorty's hand half went to it and stopped abruptly. He shook his head. "There's that blamed white horse right below, and they say it's worse than the box." Several miles below, all four walked down to look at the bad water. The river, which was a succession of rapids, was here half blocked by a rocky reef. The whole body of water, rushing crookedly into the narrow passage, accelerated its speed frightfully and created huge waves, white and scary. This was the dread mane of the White Horse, and here an even heavier toll of dead had been exacted. On one side of the mane was a suck-under, and on the opposite side was the big whirlpool. To go through, the mane itself must be ridden. As they watched, a boat came to the rapids above. It was a large boat laden with several tons of outfit, and handled by 6 men. Before it reached the main, it was jumping, at times almost hidden by the foam and spray. Shorty said, "God, she's gone! No, there she is!" The next moment, in the thick of the main, the boat came into view. To Kit's amazement, he saw the whole long bottom. The boat, for the fraction of an instant, was in the air. Then came a second disappearance. 3 times the boat leaped and buried itself. Then those on the bank saw its nose take the whirlpool. The steersman surrendered and helped the boat to take the circle. The boat was sucked into and down through the stiff wall of the corkscrew on the opposite side of the river. 100 feet below, boxes began to float up. Then appeared the bottom of the boat, and 6 heads of 6 men. 2 managed to reach the bank. The others were drawn under. There was a long minute of silence. Shorty was the first to speak. "Come on," he said. "We might as well try it. I'll be too frightened if I stay here any longer." Shorty and Kit tramped back through a foot of snow to the head of the rapids and let off the boat. Kit knew that old Isaac Bellew and all the other Bellews had done things like this in their westward march of empire. What they had done, he could do. It was the meat, the strong meat, and he knew, as never before, that it required strong men to eat such meat. "You've sure got to keep the top of the ridge," Shorty shouted at him as the boat quickened in the quickening current and took the head of the rapids. Kit nodded, put his strength and weight on the steering gear, and headed the boat for the plunge. Several minutes later, half swamped and lying against the bank below the White Horse, Shorty shook Kit's hand. "Meat! Meat!" Shorty cried. "We eat it raw! We eat it alive!" At the top of the bank they met Breck. Kit shook his hand. "I'm afraid your boat can't make it," he said. "It's smaller than ours and a bit cranky." The man pulled out a roll of bills. "I'll give you each 100 if you run it through." Kit looked out and up the mane of the White Horse. "It isn't that," Shorty was saying. "We don't want your money. But my partner is the real meat with boats, and when he says yours isn't safe, he knows what he's talking about." Kit nodded affirmation and glanced at Mrs. Breck. Her eyes were fixed upon him, and he saw prayer in the woman's eyes. Shorty followed his gaze, and they looked at each other in confusion. Moved by the common impulse, they nodded to each other and turned to the trail that led to the head of the rapids. They had not gone 100 yards when they met Stein and Sprague coming down. "Where are you going?" the latter demanded. "To fetch that other boat through," Shorty answered. "No, you're not. It's getting dark. You two are going to make camp." Kit's disgust forbade him to speak. "He's got his wife with him," Shorty said. "That's his problem," Stein contributed. "I forbid you," Sprague said harshly. "Smoke, if you go another step, I'll fire you." "And you too, Shorty," Stein added. "You could do nothing with us fired," Shorty replied. "How'll you get your boat to Dawson? Who'll serve you coffee? Come on, Smoke. They don't dare fire us. Besides, we've got agreements. If they fire us, they've got to give us grub to last us through the winter." When Breck's boat caught the first rough water, the waves began to lap aboard. Shorty looked back, and Kit felt a rush of warmth at his heart for this man who couldn't swim and couldn't back out. In the gathering darkness, Kit saw the main and the crooked current coming into it. After that, leaping and burying, he had no clear impression of anything except his weight on the steering oar, and wished his uncle were there to see. They appeared breathless, wet through, the boat filled with water. A few careful strokes, and the boat softly touched the bank. Mrs. Breck was looking down from above. Her prayer had been answered, and the tears were streaming down her cheeks. "You boys have simply got to take the money," Breck called down. "Damn the money," said Shorty. "Fetch out that whiskey." In the morning, as usual, they were among the last of the boats to start. Stein and Sprague seemed incapable of realizing that the freeze-up might come at any time. They got in the way, delayed, and doubled the work of Kit and Shorty. The trail by water crossed Lake Labarge. Here was no fast current, but a stretch of 40 miles which must be rowed. The freezing of the water on their oar blades kept one man occupied in chopping it off with a hatchet. Sprague and Stein loafed. Kit had learned how to throw his weight on an oar, but he noted that his employers only pretended to be rowing. At last Sprague said they would run back into the mouth of the river for shelter. Stein agreed, and the several hard-won miles were lost. A second day, and a third, the same fruitless attempt was made. The freeze-up was very imminent. "Come on!" Shorty roared in the morning, long before daylight. "Move, you sleepers! Here's your coffee. We're going to make a start." Grumbling and complaining, Stein and Sprague were forced to get under way 2 hours earlier than ever before. 3 hours they struggled, and 4, one man steering, 1 chopping ice, 2 toiling at the oars, and each taking his various turns. The northwest shore came nearer and nearer. At last Sprague surrendered. "What's the use?" he whined. "We can't make it. We're going to turn back." "We're going on," said Shorty. "Chop ice, and when you feel better, you can change me." It was heartbreaking toil, but they reached the shore only to find it composed of rocks and cliffs, with no place to land. "I told you so," Sprague whimpered. "We're going back." Nobody spoke, and Kit held the boat into the seas. He did his best to hearten the 2 weaklings, and an hour they laboured, and a second. A few minutes later Sprague drew in his oar. "I'm finished," he said, and there were tears in his voice. "So are the rest of us," Kit answered, himself ready to cry or to commit murder, so great was his exhaustion. "We're going back. Turn the boat around." "I'll see you in hell first," Kit replied. "Take hold of that oar and pull." In moments of exhaustion, men lose all their reserves of civilization, and such a moment had come. Each man had reached the breaking point. Sprague drew his revolver and turned it on Kit. Kit had never had a gun presented at him in his life, and now, to his surprise, it seemed to mean nothing at all. "If you don't turn the boat around, I'll shoot you," Sprague threatened. Then Shorty stopped chopping ice and stood up behind Sprague. "Go on and shoot," said Shorty, waving the hatchet. "I'm just waiting for a chance to strike you." "You were engaged to obey orders," Stein broke in. Shorty turned on him. "Oh, you get yours as soon as I finish with your partner." "Sprague," Kit said, "I'll give you just 30 seconds to put away that gun and get that oar out." Sprague hesitated, gave a short hysterical laugh, put the revolver away, and bent his back to the work. For 2 hours more, inch by inch, they fought their way along the edge of the foaming rocks, and they came to a narrow opening. They landed on the beach, and the 2 employers lay in collapse in the boat, while Kit and Shorty pitched the tent, built a fire, and started the cooking. The gale stopped at nightfall, and it came on clear and cold. A cup of coffee, set aside to cool, a few minutes later was covered with half an inch of ice. At 8 o'clock, when Sprague and Stein were sleeping the sleep of exhaustion, Kit came back from a look at the boat. "It's the freeze-up, Shorty," he announced. "There's a skin of ice over the whole pond already." "What are you going to do?" "There's only one thing. The lake, of course, freezes first. The rapid current of the river may keep it open for days. This time tomorrow, any boat caught in Lake Labarge remains there until next year." "You mean we got to get out tonight? Now?" Kit nodded. "Hey, you sleepers," was Shorty's answer. "It is still dark," was the objection. Shorty jerked out a couple of ropes from the tent. "It's not morning," he said. "It's evening. Come on, the lake's freezing. We've got to get across." Stein sat up. "Let it freeze. We're not going to stir." "All right," said Shorty. "We're going on with the boat." "You were engaged to take your outfit to Dawson," Shorty caught him up. "Well, we're taking it, aren't we?" He made his point by bringing half the tent down on top of them. They broke their way through the thin ice in the little harbour and came out on the lake, where the water, heavy and glassy, froze on their oars with every stroke. The boat proceeded slower and slower. Often afterwards Kit tried to remember that night. His one impression was that he struggled through biting frost and intolerable exhaustion for 1,000 years. Stein complained of frosted fingers, and Sprague of his nose, while the pain in Kit's cheeks and nose told him that he too had been touched. The water of the lake was gone, 100 yards away was the shore of the north end. Shorty insisted that it was the opening of the river and that he could see water. He and Kit alone were able to work, and with their oars they broke the ice and forced the boat along. And at last gasp of their strength, they made it to the rapid river. One look back showed them several boats which had fought through the night and were hopelessly frozen in. Then they turned around a bend in a current running 6 miles an hour. Day by day they floated down the swift river. When they made camp at nightfall, they chopped a space in the ice in which to lay the boat and carried outfit hundreds of feet to shore. In the morning they chopped the boat out through the new ice and caught the current. Shorty set up the sheet-iron stove in the boat, and over this Stein and Sprague hung through the long drifting hours. They had surrendered, no longer gave orders, and their one desire was to reach Dawson. The last night ashore was spent between the mouths of the White River and the Stewart. At daylight they found the Yukon, 1/2 mile wide, running white from ice-rimmed bank to ice-rimmed bank. "We'll be the last boat this year to make Dawson," Kit said. For half an hour, with axes, Kit and Shorty struggled to cut a way into the stream. 5 minutes after they ceased their work, the boat was frozen in. The whole river was freezing. Sometimes they floated sideways, sometimes stern first. While the hours passed, Shorty stoked the stove and cooked meals. Night came, and after many efforts they gave up the attempt to force the boat to shore, and through the darkness they swept helplessly onwards. "What if we pass Dawson?" Shorty asked. "We'll walk back," Kit answered, "if we're not crushed in a jam." The sky was clear, and in the light of the cold stars they saw mountains on either bank. At 11 o'clock, from below, came a roar. The river was jamming. One piece of ice carried the boat away. They saw dark water within a foot of them. Then all movement stopped. They saw lights ashore, and the Yukon surrendered, and the river ceased for 6 months. For 3 days Kit and Shorty laboured, carrying the 1.5 tons of outfit from the middle of the river to the log cabin Stein and Sprague had bought on the hill overlooking Dawson. This work finished in the warm cabin as twilight was falling. Sprague motioned Kit to him. Outside, the thermometer registered 65 below zero. "Your full month isn't up, Smoke," Sprague said, "but here it is, your money in full. I wish you luck." "How about the agreement?" Kit asked. "You know there's a famine here. A man can't get work even in the mines unless he has his own grub. You agreed." "I know no such agreement," Sprague interrupted. "Do you, Stein? We engaged you by the month. There's your pay." Kit's hands clenched, and both men shrank away from it. He never had struck a man in anger in his life, and he could not bring himself to do it. Shorty saw his trouble and interposed. "Look here, Smoke, I'm not travelling with them any more. You and me stick together. Now, you take your blankets and hike down to the Elkhorn. Wait for me. I'll settle up, collect what's coming, and give them what's coming." Half an hour afterwards, Shorty appeared at the Elkhorn. From his bleeding knuckles and the skin off one cheek, it was evident that he had given Stein and Sprague what was coming. "You ought to see that cabin," he chuckled, as they stood at the bar. "None of them shows up on the street for a week, and now it's all clear for you and me. Grub's $1.50 a pound. There's no work for wages without you have your own grub. Moose meat's selling for $2 a pound, and there isn't any. We got enough money for a month's grub and ammunition. and we hike up the Klondike to the back country. If there's no moose, we go and live with the Indians. But if we haven't got 5,000 pounds of meat 6 weeks from now, I'll sure go back and apologize to our bosses, okay?" Kit's hand went out, and they shook. "But I don't know anything about hunting," he said. Shorty lifted his glass. "But you're a sure meat-eater, and I'll teach you." The Stampede to Squaw Creek. 2 months after Smoke Bellew and Shorty went after moose, they were back in Dawson. The hunting was done. The meat hauled in and sold for $2.50 a pound, and between them they possessed $3,000 in gold dust and a good team of dogs. They had killed 4 moose in a narrow canyon. The mystery of the strayed animals was the same as the luck of their killers. 4 famished Indian families reported there was no game. Meat was traded for starving dogs, and after a week of feeding, Smoke and Shorty harnessed the animals and began bringing the meat to the Dawson market. The problem of the 2 men now was to turn their gold dust into food. The current price for flour and beans was $1.50 a pound, but the difficulty was to find a seller. Hundreds of men, with money but no food, had been compelled to leave the country. Smoke met Shorty in the warm saloon and found him jubilant. "Life is no use without whiskey and sugar," was Shorty's greeting, as he pulled lumps of ice from his moustache, "and I sure just got 18 pounds of that same sugar. The guy only charged $3 a pound for it. What luck did you have?" "I, too, have not been idle," Smoke answered with pride. "I bought 50 pounds of flour, and there's a man who says he'll let me have 50 pounds more tomorrow." "Great! We'll sure live till the river opens." "Smoke, our dogs are the best. A dog buyer offered me 200 apiece for the 5 of them. I told him nothing doing. They sure took on class when they got meat outside, but it's sad, feeding them on grub that's worth $2.50 a pound. Come on and have a drink." Several minutes later, he remembered something. "That man I was to meet in the Tivoli, he's got some spoiled bacon he'll sell for $1.50 a pound. We can feed it to the dogs and save $1 a day. So long." "So long," said Smoke. "I'm going to the cabin and to bed." Shorty left the place when a fur-clad man entered through the double doors. His face lighted at the sight of Smoke, who recognized him as Breck. "I heard you were in town," Breck said hurriedly as they shook hands. "Been looking for you for half an hour. Come outside, I want to talk to you." Outside, Smoke drew off one mitten, lighted a match, and glanced at the thermometer that hung beside the door. He felt as if the frost had burned his naked hand. Overhead arched the flaming aurora borealis, while from all Dawson arose the mournful howling of thousands of wolf dogs. 60 below, Kit spat experimentally, and the spittle cracked in the air. "Don't tell me it's a stampede." "It is," Breck whispered back in fear of some other listener. "You know Squaw Creek?" "Nothing doing there," was Smoke's judgment. "It was prospected years ago. So were all the other rich creeks. Listen, it's big. There won't be a claim less than $500,000. It's a dead secret. I told my wife that I was going to find you before I started. Now, so long. My pack's hidden down the bank. You know what it means if you're seen with the stampeding outfit? Get your partner and follow. You ought to stake 4th or 5th claim from discovery." When Smoke entered the little cabin, he heard a heavy breathing. "Go to bed," Shorty mumbled as Smoke shook his shoulder. "Put on your clothes," Smoke said. "We've got to stake a couple of claims." Shorty sat up and started to explode, but Smoke's hand covered his mouth. "Shh! "It's a big strike. Don't wake the neighborhood. Dawson's asleep." "Huh? Nobody tells anybody about a strike, of course not. But everybody hits the trail just the same." "Squaw Creek," Smoke whispered. "Breck gave me the tip. Gold from the grassroots down. Come on." Shorty's eyes closed as he went back into sleep. The next moment his blankets were swept off him. Shorty began to dress. "Going to take the dogs?" he asked. "No, we can make better time without them." "Then I'll throw 'em a meal. Be sure you take a candle." Shorty opened the door, felt the bite of the cold, and shrank back to pull down his ear-flaps and mitten his hands. 5 minutes later he returned, sharply rubbing his nose. "Smoke, I'm against this stampede. It's colder than hell 1,000 years before the first fire. Besides, it's Friday the 13th. With small packs on their backs, they started down the hill. Shorty missed a turn of the trail into deep snow and raised his voice. "Can't you keep still?" Smoke said. "You'll have all Dawson awake and after us." "Huh? See the light in that cabin, and in that one over there, and hear that door slam? The lights? Just burying their dead." By the time they reached the foot of the hill, lights were springing up in the cabins, doors were slamming, and from behind came the sound of many moccasins on the hard-packed snow. By the time they reached the main street, 100 men were in line behind them, and more men could be heard arriving. "It's a sure stampede," Shorty decided. "Or might all of them be sleepwalkers?" "We're at the head of a procession at any rate," was Smoke's answer. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe that's a firefly ahead there. That one, and that one. Believe me, there's a whole string of processions ahead. They must be 1,000 men ahead of us and 10,000 behind. Now you listen to me. When I get a hunch, it's sure right, and we're in wrong on this stampede. Let's turn back and sleep." "You'd better save your breath if you intend to keep up," Smoke answered gruffly. My legs are short, but I can sure walk everyone here off the ice." And Smoke knew he was right, for he had long learned his comrade's phenomenal walking powers. Smoke quickened, and was soon at the rear of the nearest bunch of stampeders. "Hike along, you Smoke," he urged. "Walk over them unburied dead." Within a few feet of the west bank, the trail turned to the south, emerging from the jam upon smooth ice. The ice was buried under several feet of fine snow. Through this the sled trail ran, barely 2 feet in width. On either side one sank to his knees and deeper in the snow. The stampeders didn't want to give way, and Smoke and Shorty had to plunge into the deep snow. The average pace of the stampeders on the smooth going was 3 miles and a half an hour. Smoke and Shorty were doing 4.5, though sometimes they broke into short runs and went faster. Shorty was irrepressible and pessimistic. "There are thousands of stampeders ahead of us, and that creek isn't 100 miles long. Somebody's going to get left, and it looks like you and me." "If you saved your breath and kept up, we'd cut down a few of that 1,000, Smoke replied. "Who, me? If you get out of the way, I'd show you a good pace." Smoke laughed. The whole aspect of the adventure had changed. In truth, he was less interested in staking a fortune than in beating Shorty. After all, he concluded, it wasn't the reward of the game, but the playing of it that counted. Mind and muscle and stamina and soul were challenged in a contest with this Shorty, a man who had never opened the books. Half hour by half hour they alternated in setting pace. Their exertions kept them warm, though their breath froze on their faces from lips to chin. So intense was the cold that they almost continually rubbed their noses and cheeks with their mittens. A few minutes' break allowed the flesh to grow numb. Often they thought they had reached the lead, but always they overtook more stampeders who had started before them. Once Smoke lighted a match and glanced at his watch. He never repeated it, for so quick was the bite of the frost on his bared hands that half an hour passed before they were again comfortable. 4:00, he said, as he pulled on his mittens, and we've already passed 300. 338, Shorty corrected. I've been keeping count. Get out of the way, stranger. This was addressed to a man, evidently exhausted, who could no more than stumble along and who blocked the trail. They learned afterwards the horrors of that night. Exhausted men sat down to rest by the way and failed to get up again. 7 were frozen to death, while scores of amputations of toes, feet, and fingers were performed on the survivors in the Dawson hospitals. For the stampede to Squaw Creek occurred on the coldest night of the year. Before morning, the spirit thermometers at Dawson registered 70 degrees below zero. The men were mostly newcomers in the country who did not know the way of the cold. A few minutes later, when a flaming ribbon spilled pulsating fire over the heavens, they saw on the ice, 1/4 of a mile ahead, 2 forms. Beyond, for a mile, nothing moved. "They're leading the procession," Smoke said, as darkness fell again. "Come on, let's get them." At the end of half an hour, Shorty broke into a run. "If we catch 'em, we'll never pass them. I bet there are no chachacos." Smoke was leading when they finally caught up, and he was glad to ease to a walk at their heels. Almost immediately he got the impression that the one nearer him was a woman. How this impression came he could not tell. Hooded and furred, the dark form was as any form, yet there was a sense of familiarity about it. He waited for the next flame of the aurora, and by its light saw the smallness of her feet. But he saw more, the walk, and knew it for the unmistakable walk he had once resolved never to forget. "She's a sure goer," Shorty said. "I'll bet it's an Indian." "How do you do, Miss Gastill?" Smoke addressed her. "How do you do?" she answered, with a turn of the head and a quick glance. "It's too dark to see. Who are you?" "Smoke." She laughed in the frost, and he was certain it was the prettiest laughter he'd ever heard. "How many chachacos are there behind?" "Several thousand, I think. We passed over 300, and they weren't wasting any time." "It's the old story," she said bitterly. "The newcomers get in on the rich creeks, and the old-timers who dared and suffered and made this country get nothing. Old-timers made this discovery on Squaw Creek. How it leaked out is a mystery, and they sent word up to all the old-timers on Sea Lion. But it's 10 miles farther than Dawson, and when they arrive, they'll find the creek staked to the skyline by the Dawson chachacos. It isn't right. It isn't fair." "It's too bad," Smoke sympathized, "but I don't know what you're going to do about it. First come, first served, you know." "I wish I could do something," she flashed back at him. "Man by man, I know the crowd from Sea Lion, and they are men. They starved in this country in the old days, and they worked like giants to develop it. I went through the hard times with them when I was a little girl, and I was with them in the Birch Creek famine, and in the 40-mile famine. They're heroes, and they deserve some reward." And now, if you'll forgive my tirade, I'll save my breath, for I don't know when you and all the rest may try to pass Dad and me." No further talk passed between Joy and Smoke for an hour or so, though he noticed that for a time she and her father talked in low tones. "I know them," Shorty told Smoke. "He's old Louis Gastel, and that must be his kid. He came into this country so long ago nobody can recollect, and he brought the girl with him. She only a baby." "I don't think we'll try to pass them," Smoke said. "We're at the head of the stampede, and there are only 4 of us." Shorty agreed, and another hour of silence followed. At 7 o'clock, the blackness was broken by the last display of the aurora borealis, which showed to the west a broad opening between snow-clad mountains. "Squaw Creek!" Joy exclaimed. At this point, the Dyea Trail turned abruptly across the Yukon to the east bank. They must leave the hard-packed main-travelled trail, mount the jams, and follow the dim trail. Louis Gastel, leading, slipped in the darkness on the rough ice, and sat up, holding his ankle in both hands. He struggled to his feet and went on, but at a slower pace and with a limp. After a few minutes, he abruptly halted. "It's no use," he said to his daughter. "I've sprained a tendon. You go ahead and stake for me as well as yourself." "Can't we do something?" Smoke asked. Louis Gastel shook his head. "She can stake 2 claims as well as 1. I'll crawl over to the bank, start a fire, and bandage my ankle. I'll be all right. Go on, Joy. Stake ours above the Discovery claim. It's richer higher up." "We'll take care of your daughter," Smoke said. Louis Gastel laughed harshly. "Thank you just the same," he said, "but she can take care of herself. Follow her and watch her." "Do you mind if I lead?" she asked Smoke as she headed on. "I know this country better than you." "Lead on," Smoke answered gallantly, "though I agree with you it's a shame all us Chechakos are going to beat that sea lion bunch to it. Isn't there some way to shake them?" She shook her head. "We can't hide our trail, and they'll follow it like sheep." After a quarter of a mile, she turned sharply to the west. Smoke noticed that they were going through unpacked snow, but neither he nor Shorty observed that the dim trail they had been on still led south. They couldn't witness the procedure of Louis Gastel, for that old-timer, no longer limping, running with his nose to the trail like a hound, followed them. Also, they didn't see him widen the turn to the fresh trail they had made to the west. And finally, they didn't see him keep on the old dim trail that still led south. A trail did run up the creek, but so slight was it that they continually lost it in the darkness. After a quarter of an hour, Joy Gastel was willing to drop into the rear and let the 2 men take turns in breaking away through the snow. This slowness of the leaders enabled the whole stampede to catch up, and when daylight came, at 9 o'clock, as far back as they could see was an unbroken line of men. Joy's dark eyes sparkled at the sight. "How long since we started up the creek?" she asked. "Fully 2 hours," Smoke answered. "And 2 hours back make 4, she laughed. "The stampede from Sea Lion is saved." Smoke stopped and confronted her. "I don't understand," he said. "You don't? Then I'll tell you. This is Norway Creek. Squaw Creek is the next to the south." Smoke was, for the moment, speechless. "You did it on purpose?" Shorty demanded. "I did it to give the old-timers a chance," she laughed mockingly. The men grinned at each other and finally joined her. "I'd lay you across my knee and give you a walloping if women weren't so scarce in this country," Shorty assured her. Your father didn't sprain a tendon, but waited till we were out of sight, and then went on?" Smoke asked. She nodded, and this time Smoke's laughter rang out clear and true. It was the laughter of a frankly beaten man. "Why don't you get angry with me?" she asked. "Well, we might as well be starting back," Shorty urged. "My feet's getting cold standing here." Smoke shook his head. "That would mean 4 hours lost. We must be 8 miles up this creek now, and Norway is making a long swing south. We'll follow it, then cross over the divide somehow, and reach Squaw Creek somewhere above Discovery." He looked at Joy. "Won't you come along with us? I told your father we'd look after you." She hesitated. "I think I shall, if you don't mind." She was looking straight at him, and her face was no longer mocking. "Really, Mr. Smoke, you make me almost sorry for what I've done. But somebody had to save the old-timers." "I think that stampeding is at best a sporting proposition." "And I think you two are very fair about it," she went on, then added with a sigh, "What a pity you're not old-timers." For 2 hours more they kept to the frozen creek bed of Norway, then turned to the south. At midday they began the ascent of the divide. Behind them they could see a long line of stampeders. As for themselves, they staggered through snow to their waists and had to stop every few yards to breathe. Shorty was the first to call a halt. "We've been walking for over 12 hours, he said. "Smoke, I'm tired, and so are you, and this poor girl here can't keep her legs if she doesn't get something in her stomach. Here's where we build a fire. What do you say?" They made a temporary camp so quickly and methodically that Joy, watching with jealous eyes, admitted to herself that the old-timers could not do it better. But they kept away from the heat of the fire until noses and cheeks had been rubbed cruelly. Snow, as fine and hard and crystalline as granulated sugar, was poured into the pan until enough water was melted for the coffee. Smoked fried bacon and heated up biscuits. Shorty tended the fire, and Joy set the simple table composed of 2 plates, 2 cups, 2 spoons, a tin of mixed salt and pepper, and a tin of sugar. When it came to eating, she and Smoke shared one set between them, and ate out of the same plate, and drank from the same cup. It was nearly 2 in the afternoon when they began going down. Earlier in the winter, some moose hunter had made a trail up the canyon. As a result, in the midst of soft snow was a line of irregular hummocks. Joy, who was eager now that the 2 men should stake, and fearing that they were slowing their pace because of her tiredness, insisted on taking her turn in the lead. The speed and manner in which she made footing was approved by Shorty. "Look at her!" he cried. "Look at her moccasins move along. No high heels there. She uses the legs God gave her. She's the right squaw for any bear hunter." She flashed back a smile that included Smoke. As they came to Squaw Creek, they could see the stampede, struggling along the divide. The stream, frozen to bottom, was from 20 to 30 feet wide. No recent feet had disturbed the snow. "Look out for springs," Joy warned. "At 70 below you'll lose your feet if you break through." These springs, common to most Klondike streams, never cease at the lowest temperatures. The water is hidden from the cold by later surface freezings and snowfalls. Thus, a man, stepping on dry snow, might break through half an inch of ice and find himself up to the knees in water. In 5 minutes, unless able to remove the wet gear, the loss of one's foot was the penalty. The long grey twilight of the Arctic had settled down. They watched for a blazed tree on either bank. which would show the center stake of the last claim located. Joy was the first to find it. She ran ahead crying, "Somebody's been here! See the snow? There it is! See that spruce?" She sank suddenly to her waist in the snow. "Now I've done it," she said. Then she cried, "Don't come near me! I'll wade out." Step by step she forced her way to solid footing. Smoke did not wait, but jumped to the bank where dry sticks waited the match. By the time she reached his side, the first flames of the fire were rising. "Sit down," he commanded. She obediently sat down in the snow. He slipped his pack from his back and spread a blanket for her feet. From above came the voices of the stampeders who followed them. "Let Shorty stake," she urged. "Go on, Shorty," Smoke said, as he attacked her moccasins already stiff with ice. "Pace off 1,000 feet and place 2 center stakes. We can fix the corner stakes afterwards." With his knife, Smoke cut away the lacings and leather of the moccasins. The socks and heavy woolen stockings were covered in ice. "How are your feet?" he asked as he worked. "Numb. I can't move nor feel my toes, but it'll be all right. The fire is burning beautifully. Watch out you don't freeze your own hands." He slipped his mittens on and tore the frozen garments. The white skin of one foot appeared, then that of the other, to be exposed to the bite of 70 below zero. Then came the rubbing with snow, carried on with an intensity till she shrank and moved her toes, and joyously complained of the hurt. He placed her feet on the blanket close to the flames. She could now safely remove her mittens and manipulate her own feet. While she did this, he attacked his hands. The snow was like sand. Slowly the stings and pangs of circulation came back into the chilled flesh. Then he unstrapped the light pack from her back and got out a complete change of footgear. Shorty returned along the creek bed and climbed the bank to them. "I sure staked a full 1,000 feet," he proclaimed. "Number 27 and number 28, though I'd only got the upper stake of 27 when I met the first guy of the bunch behind." "What did you tell him?" Joy cried. "Well, I told him that if he didn't back up 500 feet, I'd punch his frozen nose into ice cream and chocolate eclairs. He backed up, and I've got in the center stakes of 2 full and honest 500-foot creek claims. He staked next. It's too dark to see now, but we can put out the corner stakes in the morning." When they awoke, it was so warm that Shorty and Smoke found the temperature no more than 20 below. "Good morning. How are your feet?" was Smoke's greeting to where Joy Gastel was sitting up in her sleeping furs. Shorty built the fire, and Smoke cooked breakfast. "You go and fix corner stakes, Smoke," Shorty said. "There's gravel under where I chopped ice for the coffee, and I'm going to melt water and wash a pan of that gravel for luck." Smoke departed, axe in hand. Starting from the downstream center stake of 27, he headed across the narrow valley. He proceeded almost automatically, for his mind was alive with recollections of the night before. He felt that he had won the delicate lines and firm muscles of those feet and ankles he had rubbed with snow, and all of this woman of his kind. A feeling of possession mastered him. It seemed that all that was necessary for him to walk up to Joy Gastel, take her hand in his, and say, "Come." In this mood, he discovered something that made him forget the white feet of woman. He did not reach the valley rim, but instead found another stream. He returned to the stream where were the center stakes. He followed the bed of the creek around a wide horseshoe bend, and found that the 2 creeks were the same creek. Next, he walked twice through the snow, running the first line from the lower stake of 27, the second from the upper stake of 28. and he found that the upper stake of the latter was lower than the lower stake of the former. In half-darkness, Shorty had located their 2 claims on the horseshoe. Smoke came back to the little camp. Shorty, at the end of washing a pan of gravel, exploded at the sight of him. "We got it!" Shorty cried, holding out the pan. "Look at it! A mess of gold! I never got butter like what's in this pan!" Smoke cast an incurious glance at the coarse gold, poured himself a cup of coffee at the fire, and sat down. Joy sensed something was wrong, and looked at him with solicitous eyes. Shorty was disappointed by his partner's lack of delight in the discovery. "Why don't you get excited?" he demanded. Smoke took a swallow of coffee before replying. "In short, Shorty, you staked our 2 claims on a big horseshoe bend." Shorty set the gold pan down in the sloe and stood up. "Go on," he repeated. "The upper stake of 28 is 10 feet below the lower stake of 27. "You mean we've got nothing, Smoke?" "Worse than that. We've got 10 feet less than nothing." Shorty departed down the bank on the run. 5 minutes later he returned. In response to Joy's look he nodded. Without speech, he went over to a log and sat down to gaze steadily at the snow in front of his moccasins. We might as well break camp and start back for Dawson," Smoke said, beginning to fold the blankets. "I'm sorry, Smoke," Joy said. "It's all my fault." "It's all right," he answered. "But it's my fault, wholly mine," she persisted. "Dad staked for me down near Discovery. I know. I'll give you my claim." He shook his head. "Shorty," she pleaded. Shorty shook his head and began to laugh. It was a colossal laugh. "It isn't hysterics," he explained. "I'm mighty amused at times, and this is one of them." His gaze fell on the gold pan. He gravely kicked it, scattering the gold over the landscape. "It isn't ours," he said. "It belongs to the guy I backed up 500 feet last night. Come on, Smoke, let's start to Dawson. Though if you're planning to kill me, I won't lift a finger to prevent." The race for number 3. Pretty gay front, partner." Shorty looked at his partner with disapproval, and Smoke, trying to rub the wrinkles out of the pair of trousers he had just put on, was irritated. "They sure fit you close for a second-hand buy," Shorty went on. "What was the price?" $150 for the suit," Smoke answered. "The man was nearly my size. What are you smiling at?" "Who, me? Oh, nothing. I was just thinking it was strange for a meat-eater that came to Dawson in an ice jam, with no grub, 1 suit of underclothes, a pair of moccasins, and overalls." "What's her name?" "There isn't any her, my friend. I'm to have dinner at Colonel Bowie's. Shorty, you're envious because I'm going into high society, and you're not invited." Smoke went on dressing with fingers that had lost their deftness, tying a tie at the throat of his soft cotton shirt. "I wish I hadn't sent all my starched shirts to the laundry," Shorty murmured sympathetically. "I might lend you one." By this time Smoke was straining at a pair of shoes. The woolen socks were too thick to go into them. He looked at Shorty, who shook his head. "If I had thin ones, I wouldn't lend them to you. Back to the moccasins, partner. You'd sure freeze your toes in gear like that." "I paid $15 for them, second-hand," Smoke said. "There won't be a man not in moccasins." "But there will be women, Shorty. I'm going to sit and eat with real, live women. Mrs. Bowie and several others. So the Colonel told me." "Well, moccasins won't spoil their appetite," was Shorty's comment. As a high-salaried expert and the representative of the great house of Guggenheim, Colonel Bowie lived in one of the most magnificent cabins in Dawson. It was 2 stories high, and it had a big living room. Here were big bearskins on the rough board floor, and on the walls horns of moose and caribou. Here roared an open fireplace and a big wood-burning stove. And here smoke met the social elect of Dawson, the ultra-cream of the mining city whose population had been recruited from all the world. And here, dazzling in evening gown, he met Joy Gastel, whom before he had seen only on trail, in fur and moccasins. At dinner he found himself beside her. "I feel like a fish out of water," he confessed. "All you folks are so real grand, you know. Look at von Schroeder there. He's actually got a dinner jacket. I noticed he wore moccasins just the same. How do you like my outfit?" "It looks as if you've grown stout," she laughed. "Wrong. Guess again." "It's somebody else's." "You win. I bought it from one of the clerks at the A.C. Company." "It's a shame clerks are so narrow-shouldered," she sympathized, "and you haven't told me what you think of my outfit." "I can't," he said. "I'm out of breath. I'd quite forgotten that women have arms and shoulders. Tomorrow morning, like my friend Shorty, I'll wake up and know it's all a dream." I was remembering that it was on Squaw Creek that I discovered you had feet. "And I can never forget that you saved them for me," she said. "I've wanted to see you ever since to thank you, and that's why you are here tonight." "You asked the Colonel to invite me?" "No, Mrs. Bowie, and I asked her to let me have you at the table, and here's my chance. Everybody's talking. Listen, and don't interrupt. You know Mono Creek?" "Yes." "It has turned out rich, dreadfully rich. They estimate the claims as worth $1 million and more apiece. It was only located the other day. I remember the stampede. Well, the whole creek was staked to the skyline, and yet right now on the main creek, number 3 below Discovery is unrecorded. The creek was so far away from Dawson that the commissioner allowed 60 days for recording after location. Every claim was recorded except number 3 below. It was staked by Cyrus Johnson. And that was all. Cyrus Johnson has disappeared. Whether he died, whether he went downriver or up, nobody knows. Anyway, in 6 days, the time for recording will be up. Then the man who stakes it and reaches Dawson first and records it, gets it." $1 million, Smoke murmured. "Gilchrist, who has the next claim below, has got $600 in a single pan." "But why doesn't everybody know?" Smoke asked skeptically. "They're beginning to know. They kept it secret for a long time, and it's only now that it's coming out. Good dog teams will be at a premium in another 24 hours. Now you've got to get away as decently as you can as soon as dinner is over. I've arranged it. An Indian will come with a message for you. You read it, make your excuses, and get away." "I don't understand." "What you must do is to get out tonight and buy dog teams. There's Hanson's team, 7 big dogs. He's holding them at $400 each. That's top price tonight, but it won't be tomorrow. And Sitka Charlie has 8 Malamutes. He's asking $3,500 for. Tomorrow he'll laugh at an offer of $5,000. Then you've got your own team of dogs, and you'll have to buy several more teams. That's your work tonight. Get the best. It's dogs as well as men that will win this race. It's 110 miles. "I can buy the dogs, but Aren't you afraid this is gambling?" "It's a sporting proposition, if that's what you mean. A race for $1 million, and with some of the hardest dog owners and travellers in the country against you. They haven't entered yet, but by this time tomorrow they will, and dogs will be worth what the richest man can afford to pay. Big Olaf is in town. He is one of the most terrible dog owners in the country, and if he enters, he will be your most dangerous man. Arizona Bill is another. He's been a professional freighter and mail carrier for years. If he goes in, interest will be centered on him and Big Olaf." "And you intend me to come along as a sort of dark horse?" "Exactly, and it will have its advantages. You are still classed as a Chilkoot. Nobody will take notice of you until you come into the final part. I shall never forgive myself for the trick I played on the Squaw Creek stampede unless you win this mono claim. And if any man can win this race against the old-timers, it's you." It was the way she said it. He felt warm all over, and in his heart and head. Her eyes met his, and it seemed to him that he read something more important than the Cyrus Johnson's claim. "I'll do it," he said. "I'll win it." What will Shorty say, was the thought that flashed through his mind. He was aroused by her voice, and realized that she had been speaking some moments. "Arizona Bill is a white Indian," she was saying, "and Big Olaf is a bear wrestler, a king of the snows. He's never known any other life but that of the wild and the frost." Smoke had travelled leisurely to Mono Creek, fearing to tire his dogs before the big race. Also, he had familiarized himself with every mile of the trail and located his relay camps. So many men had entered the race that the 110 miles of its course was almost a continuous village. Relay camps were everywhere. Von Schroeder, who had gone in purely for the sport, had no less than 11 dog teams. Arizona Bill had 8 teams. Big Olaf had 7, like Smoke. Not every day, even in the Golden North, was $1 million the prize for a dog race. The country had been swept of dogs. The prices of dogs had doubled and quadrupled in the course of the frantic speculation. Number 3 below Discovery was 10 miles up Mono Creek from its mouth. The remaining 100 miles was to be run on the frozen Yukon. On Number 3 itself were 50 tents and over 300 dogs. The race with the dogs was to be preceded by a foot race. Each man had to relocate the claim for himself, and this meant that he must place 2 center stakes and 4 corner stakes and cross the creek twice before he could start for Dawson with his dogs. Not until the stroke of midnight on Friday night was the claim open for relocation, and not until the stroke of midnight could a man plant a stake. A squad of police enforced it. The Mono Trail ran along the creek bed, and, less than 2 feet in width, was walled on either side by the snowfall of months. The problem of how 40-odd sleds and 300 dogs were to start in so narrow a course was in everybody's mind. "Huh," said Shorty. "It's going to be the biggest mix-up. I can see no way out, Smoke, except fighting through. If the whole creek is ice, there isn't room for a dozen teams. There's going to be a heap before they get out, and if any of it comes our way, you've got to let me do the punching. You can't handle the dogs 100 miles with a beaten knuckle, and that's what'll happen if you land on somebody's jaw." Smoke nodded his head. "You're right, Shorty. I couldn't risk the chance." "I'll sure drive you to the Yukon," Shorty went on. "After that, it's up to you and the dogs. What is Schroeder's scheme?" He's got his first team 1/4 of a mile down the creek, and he'll know it by a green lantern. But we'll overcome him. Me for the red light every time." The day had been clear and cold, but clouds formed across the sky, and the night came on warm and dark with a hint of snow. The thermometer registered 15 below zero, and in the Klondike winter 15 below is thought very warm. At a few minutes before midnight, leaving Shorty with the dogs 500 yards down the creek, Smoke joined the racers on number 3. There were 45 of them. Each man carried 6 stakes and a heavy wooden mallet, and was clad in a parka. Lieutenant Pollock, in a big bearskin coat, looked at his watch by the light of a fire. "Make ready," he said, as he raised a revolver in his right hand. The shot rang out, and the mallets fell. Cyrus Johnson's right to the million disappeared. Smoke drove in his stake with a leading dozen. Fires had been lighted at the corners, and by each fire stood a policeman, list in hand, checking off the names of the runners. A man was supposed to call out his name and show his face. Calling his name to the policeman, Smoke saw von Schroeder struck in collision by one of the rushers. But Smoke did not wait. Others were still ahead of him. By the light of the fire he saw the huge back of Big Olaf. It was no light work, this obstacle race. The boundaries of the claim stretched to nearly a mile, and most of it was over the uneven surface of a snow-covered land. All about Smoke men fell, and several times he pitched forward himself, on hands and knees. Once Big Olaf fell so immediately in front of him as to bring him down on top. The upper centre stake was driven by the edge of the bank. Here, as Smoke clambered, a hand gripped his ankle and jerked him back. It was impossible to see who had played the trick. Before Smoke could make another lunge for the bank, a fist dropped him half-stunned into the snow. He located the man, pointed a hook for his jaw, then remembered Shorty's warning and stopped. The next moment, struck below the knees by somebody, he went down again. Men were pouring over the other bank and piling into the jam. More blows were struck. Curses rose from panting chests. He at last crawled out of the crush and attacked the bank. It was his luck to have many men in advance of him. In the creek itself, bedlam had broken loose. A dozen sleds were piled up and overturned, and nearly 100 dogs were locked in combat. Among them, men struggled, tearing the animals apart. In packed harbours beside the narrow trail, sleds and men waited for runners that were still behind. From the rear came the whine and rush of dogs, and Smoke had barely time to leap aside into the deep snow. He saw the man kneeling and shouting madly. Smoke could see the green lantern of von Schroeder, and, just below it, the red flare that marked his own team. "Come on, you, Smoke!" he could hear Shorty yelling. From the way his partner breathed, he knew a battle had been fought. He staggered to the sled, and in a moment he was falling on it. Shorty's whip snapped as he yelled, "Go, you devils, go!" The sled jerked abruptly ahead. The dogs were big animals, and Smoke had selected them for the first stage, which included the 10 miles of Mono, and the first 10 miles of the Yukon stretch. "How many are ahead?" he asked. "You shut up and save your breath," Shorty answered. He was running behind the sled. Smoke could not see him nor the sled on which he lay. They were tearing through a wall of blackness as fast as the dogs could spring into it. From ahead came the growl of beasts and the oaths of men. The teams of two men first collided, and into it, at full career, piled Smoke's 7 big fighters. Those semi-domesticated wolves in the excitement of that night were fighting mad. The Klondike dogs, driven without reins, cannot be stopped except by voice, so that there was no stopping. From behind, sled after sled added into the turmoil. Men were overwhelmed by fresh avalanches of dogs, well-fed, well-rested, and ripe for battle. "Watch out for your knuckles!" Shorty yelled in his partner's ear. "You drag dogs out and let me do the punching." At the end, Smoke got out exhausted, panting, his jaw sore from a fist blow, his shoulder aching from the bruise of a club, the blood running warmly down one leg from the rip of a dog's fangs, and both sleeves of his parka torn. "Now you lie down and get your breath back," Shorty commanded. And through the darkness the dogs sped. Here, at the junction with the main river trail, somebody had lighted a fire, and here Shorty said goodbye. Smoke caught an unforgettable picture. Shorty, sinking down in the snow, one eye blackened and closed, knuckles bruised and broken, and one arm, fang-torn, sending a stream of blood. Smoke lay on the sled at full length, face down, holding on with both hands. If the dogs slowed down, he rose to his knees, and, yelling and urging, threw his whip into them. He passed 2 sleds before Right River was reached. Here the smooth stretch let the racers make flying exchanges of sleds. Smoke saw his sled swing in from the side, and he leapt across. "Where's Big Olaf?" he cried. "Leading," the voice answered, and the fires were left behind, and Smoke was again flying through the wall of blackness. Accidents had happened, and he could hear the men cutting out dogs and mending harnesses. Among the jams of the next short relay into 60 Mile, he passed more teams. One of his dogs wrenched a shoulder and was dragged in the harness. As Smoke cut the injured animal out, he heard the cries of dogs behind him and the voice of a man. It was von Schroeder. Smoke called a warning to prevent a collision, and the Baron went by a dozen feet to the side. Smoke heard him pass, but never saw him. On the smooth stretch of ice beside the trading post at 60 Mile, Smoke overtook 2 more sleds. All had just changed teams, and for 5 minutes they ran abreast, each man on his knees and pouring whip and voice into the maddened dogs. 2 more teams would bring him into Dawson and to the gold recorder's office, and Smoke had selected his best animals for the last 2 stretches. Sitka Charlie himself waited with 8 Malamutes that would jerk Smoke along for 20 miles, and for the finish, with a 15-mile run, was his own team, the team he had had all winter. There was nothing for Smoke to do but to lie face downward and hold on. Now and again he would plunge out of the darkness into the circle of light about a blazing fire, catch a glimpse of furred men standing by harnessed and waiting dogs, and plunge into the darkness again. Almost automatically he kept his place as the sled bumped ahead or half lifted on the swings of the bends, and sometimes Smoke wanted to shout aloud as he remembered the office of the Billow and the serial story of San Francisco, which he had left unfinished, and those empty days. The grey twilight of the morning was breaking as he exchanged his weary dogs for the 8 fresh Malamutes. Sitka Charlie called out the order of the teams ahead. Big Olaf led, Arizona Bill was second, and von Schroeder third. While they were racing for $1 million, at least $500,000 had been staked by others on the outcome of the race. No one had bet on Smoke. who was still accounted a chechacho. As daylight strengthened, Smoke caught sight of a sled ahead. When the man turned his head to exchange greetings, Smoke recognized Arizona Bill. Von Schroeder had evidently passed him. On his knees, swinging his whip and yelling, Smoke drew abreast. He noted that Arizona Bill's right arm hung dead at his side. Smoke remembered the fight in the creek bed at 3 Billow Discovery, and understood. Shorty's advice had been right. "What's happened?" Smoke asked as he began to pull ahead. "I think I've strained my shoulder," Arizona Bill answered. He dropped behind very slowly. Ahead, bunched together, Smoke could see Big Olaf and Von Schroeder. Smoke lifted his dogs into a burst of speed. He drew up close to the trail of Von Schroeder's sled, and, in this order, the 3 sleds dashed out. Dawson was 15 miles away. Von Schroeder had changed 5 miles back. Big Olaf and Smoke made flying changes. Big Olaf led past, and Smoke followed into the narrow trail beyond. Of Von Schroeder, now behind, he had no fear. But ahead was the greatest dog driver in the country. To pass him seemed impossible. Smoke hung on grimly. The race was not lost until one or the other won. And in 15 miles, many things could happen. 3 miles from Dawson, something happened. To Smoke's surprise, Big Olaf rose up and proceeded to fetch out the last ounce of effort in his animals. It was a spurt. It was sheer dog-killing, but Smoke followed. His own team was superb. No dogs on the Yukon were in better condition. Besides, Smoke had toiled with them and eaten and bedded with them, and he knew each dog. Big Olaf was barely 50 feet ahead. A sled shot out from the side and drew in toward him, and Smoke understood Big Olaf's terrific spurt. He had tried to lead for the change. This fresh team had been a private surprise of his. Nobody had any knowledge of it. Smoke tried desperately to pass during the exchange of sleds. At the speed they were going, Big Olaf did not dare to try the flying leap. If he missed and fell off, Smoke would be in the lead and the race would be lost. For half a mile the 3 sleds flew along side by side. The smooth stretch was nearing its end when Big Olaf took the chance. He leaped, and in the instant he struck, he was on his knees with a whip and voice spurting the fresh team. The smooth stretch pinched out into the narrow trail. Big Olaf failed to shake Smoke off, but Smoke could feel the pinch of strength going out of his animals. Foot by foot, Big Olaf drew away until he led by a score of yards. A great cheer went up from the population of Klondike City, assembled on the ice. Here the Klondike entered the Yukon, and half a mile away, on the north bank, stood Dawson. Smoke caught a glimpse of a sled shooting out to him. He recognized the splendid animals that drew it, and Joy Gastel drove them. The hood of her squirrel-skin parka was tossed back, revealing the cameo-like oval of her face. "Jump!" she cried. Smoke struck the sledge behind her. She was full up on her knees and swinging the whip. The dogs whined in eagerness of desire and effort to overtake Big Olaf. And then, as the lead dog caught the tail of Big Olaf's sled, and yard by yard drew up abreast, the great crowd on the Dawson bank went mad. "When you're in the lead, I'm going to drop off," Joy cried out over her shoulder. Smoke tried to protest. "And watch out for the curve halfway up the bank," she warned. The 2 teams were running abreast. Then slowly, an inch at a time, Joy's leader began to forge past. "Get ready," she cried to Smoke. "I'm going to leave you in a minute. Get the whip." And as he shifted his hand to clutch the whip, they heard Big Olaf roar a warning, but too late. His lead dog, angry at being passed, attacked. His fangs struck Joy's leader on the flank. The rival teams flew at one another's throats. The sleds turned over. Smoke struggled to his feet and tried to lift Joy up, but she pushed him from her, crying, "Go!" Big Olaf was on foot, already 50 feet in advance. Smoke followed, and when the two men reached the foot of the Dawson bank, he was at the other's heels. 5 blocks down the main street was the gold recorder's office. The street was packed as for the parade. Side by side they ran along the narrow trail between the walls of fur-clad, cheering men. Now one, now the other, with great convulsive jerks, gained an inch or so, only to lose it immediately after. They were racing for $1 million and greatest honor in Yukon country. To Smoke, it seemed that his heart would burst, while he had lost all feeling of his legs. The open door of the recorder's office appeared ahead of them. Both men made a final spurt. Neither could draw away from the other, and side by side they hit the doorway and fell headlong onto the office floor. They sat up, but were too exhausted to rise. Big Olaf vainly tried to speak. Then he reached out his hand with unmistakable meaning. Smoke extended his, and they shook. Smoke could hear the recorder saying, but it was as if in a dream, and the voice was very thin and very far away. "All I can say is that you both win. You will have to divide the claim between you. You're partners." Big Olaf nodded his head. "You damn Chachako," he said with admiration. "I don't know how you did it, but you did." Outside, the great crowd was noisily massed. Smoke and Big Olaf helped each other to his feet. "I'm sorry my dogs jumped yours," Big Olaf said. "I couldn't be helped," Smoke panted back. "I heard you yell." "Say," Big Olaf went on with shining eyes, "that girl, one damn fine girl, eh?" "One damn fine girl," Smoke agreed. The mistake of creation. Smoke yelled at the dogs to bring the sled to a halt. "What is it now?" Shorty complained. "There isn't any water under." "No, but look at that trail turning right," Smoke answered. "I thought nobody was wandering there." The dogs began biting out particles of ice from between their toes. This ice had been water 5 minutes before. The animals had broken thin ice, snow-powdered, which had hidden the spring water of Nordbeska River. "Maybe they're hunters and pulled their freight long ago." "No," Smoke decided. "There's been travel both ways, but the last travel was up that creek. They're there now. Now what's been keeping them all the time?" "And I want to know where they're going to camp tonight," Shorty said, looking at the skyline darkening into night. "Let's follow the track up the creek," was Smoke's suggestion. "There's plenty of dead timber. We can camp any time. We're going to find something." "But look at the dogs," Shorty cried. "Look at—" "Oh, hell, all right. You'll have your will." "It won't make the trip a day longer," Smoke urged, "possibly no more than a mile longer." "Men has died for as little as a mile," Shorty retorted. "Come on for trouble. Get up, you poor sore foots, you. Get up!" The dogs obeyed and strained weakly into the soft snow. Smoke went before them to press the light surface for the dogs. It was heavy work. Dogs and men had been for days on short rations, and their reserves of energy were limited. The high rocky walls quickly drew near together, so that their way led up the bottom of a narrow canyon. The twilight, blocked by the high mountains, was no more than semi-darkness. "It's a trap," Shorty said. "It's a hole in the ground. It's a lot of trouble." Smoke made no reply, and for half an hour they toiled on in silence. "We're never going to get out of this hole in days and days. We're going to find trouble and be stuck here in a long time." "We haven't grub for days and days," Smoke answered unsympathetically. "I guess we'll manage to make out, but I tell you one thing, Smoke. I'll eat any dog in the team except Bright." "There's the beginning of your trouble," Smoke said, halting on his snowshoes and staring at an object that lay on one side of the old trail. Together they gazed down on the body of a man beside the trail. "Well fed," said Smoke. The man lay on his side, solidly frozen. From the fact that no snow powdered him, it was clear that he had lain there for a short time. "There was a general fall of snow 3 days back," said Shorty. Smoke nodded, bending over the corpse and pointing to a bullet wound in the temple. He glanced at a revolver that lay on top of the snow. 100 yards further on, they came upon a second body that lay face downward in the trail. "Two things are pretty clear," Smoke said. "They're fat. That means no famine. They've not found any gold, or they wouldn't have committed suicide. Now what do you fat guys want to kill yourselves for?" "When we find that out, we'll find the rest of trouble," Smoke answered. "Come on, it's getting dark." Quite dark it was when Smoke tripped over a body. He fell across a sled, on which lay another body, and when he had dug the snow out of his neck and struck a match, he and Shorty saw a third body, wrapped in blankets, lying beside a partially dug grave. Also, they caught sight of more graves. "Brrr," Shorty shivered. "Suicide camp." "No, see?" Smoke was looking farther at a dim light. "And there's another light, and a third one there. Come on." In several minutes, over a hard-packed trail, they were in the camp. "It's a city," Shorty whispered. "There must be 20 cabins, and not a dog. Isn't that funny?" "And that explains it," Smoke whispered back excitedly. "It's the Laura Sibley outfit. Don't you remember? Came up the Yukon last fall. Went right by Dawson without stopping. The steamer landed them at the mouth of the creek." "Sure, I remember. They were Mormons." "No, vegetarian," Smoke grinned in the darkness. "They won't eat meat, and they won't work dogs." "It's all the same. That Laura Sibley was going to take 'em right to the spot where they'd all be millionaires." "Yeah, she was their seeress, had visions and all sort of stuff." Together they listened to a groan, deep and long, that came from one of the cabins. It was taken up by another cabin and another. The effect was monstrous and horrible. Shorty shivered. "Let's find what's eating them." Smoke knocked at a lighted cabin, and was followed in by Shorty in answer to the "come in" of the voice they heard groaning. It was a simple log cabin, the earth floor covered with sawdust. The light was a kerosene lamp, and they could see bunks occupied by men. "What's the matter?" Smoke demanded of one with broad shoulders and massively muscled body, whose eyes showed pain and whose cheeks were thin. "Smallpox? What is it?" In reply, the man pointed at his mouth, spreading black and swollen lips in the effort, and Smoke recoiled at the sight. "Scurvy," he muttered to Shorty, who agreed with the diagnosis. "Plenty of grub?" Shorty asked. "Yep," was the answer from the man in another bunk. "Help yourself. The cabin next on the other side is empty." In every cabin they visited that night, they found a similar situation. Scurvy had smitten the whole camp. Originally, there had been 93 men and women, but 10 had died, and 2 had recently disappeared. Smoke told of finding the 2. What struck him and Shorty was the helplessness of these people. Their cabins were dirty. The dishes stood unwashed on the rough plank tables. There was no mutual help. "It's so strange," Smoke said to Shorty. "I've met loafers, but never so many at one time. I bet they haven't washed their own faces. No wonder they've got scurvy." "But vegetarians don't get scurvy," Shorty objected. "It's the salt meat eaters that fall for it." Smoke shook his head. "I know. And it's vegetable diet that cures scurvy. No drugs will do it. But the fact is, these grass-eaters have all got scurvy." "Must be contagious." "No, that the doctors know. Scurvy can't be caught. As I can get it, it's due to an impoverished condition of the blood." "And these people eat nothing but grass," Shorty groaned. "That proves you're all wrong, Smoke. Scurvy's catching, and you and me get it too. Rrr! I can feel the bugs crawling into my system right now." Smoke laughed skeptically and knocked on the cabin door. "What do you want?" came a woman's sharp voice. "We want to see you," Smoke answered. "Who are you?" "2 doctors from Dawson," Shorty blurted in. "Don't want to see any doctors," the woman said with pain and irritation. "Go away." Smoke opened the door and entered, turning up the kerosene lamp so that he could see. In 4 bunks, 4 women ceased from groaning and sighing to stare at the intruders. 2 were young, thin-faced creatures, the 3rd was an elderly and very stout woman, and the 4th, whom Smoke identified by her voice, was the thinnest human he had ever seen. She was Laura Sibley, the seeress and clairvoyant who had organized the expedition in Los Angeles and led it to this death camp on the Nordbeska. Laura Sibley did not believe in doctors. Also, she had ceased to believe in herself. "Why didn't you send out for help?" Smoke asked. "There's a camp at Stewart River, and Dawson is 18 days' travel from here." "Why didn't Amos Wentworth go?" she demanded. "Don't know the gentleman," Smoke answered. "He's the only one that hasn't caught the scurvy, and why, I'll tell you. No, I won't. What's the use? Our caches are filled with every kind of fruit juice and preserved vegetables. We are better suited than any other camp in Alaska to fight scurvy." "She's got you there, Smoke," Shorty cried out. "And it's a condition, not a theory. You say vegetables cure? Here are the vegetables. And where's the cure?" "There's no explanation I can see," Smoke acknowledged. "We've got to do what we can for these people. But first, we've got to make camp and take care of the dogs." Smoke and Shorty felt their way back through the darkness to the empty cabin. Together they searched the cache and found it filled with an undreamed-of variety of canned, powdered, dried, evaporated, condensed, and desiccated foods. "What in the name of reason do they get scurvy for?" Shorty demanded, examining packages of egg powder and Italian mushrooms. He took out cans of tomatoes and corn and bottles of stuffed olives. "And the seeress got the scurvy too? Why?" Next morning, Smoke encountered a man carrying a heavy load of firewood. He was a little man, clean-looking, who walked quickly. Smoke disliked him. "You're Amos Wentworth," Smoke said. "Why under the sun haven't you got the scurvy like all the rest?" "Because I exercised," came the quick reply. "What did they do?" "They loafed in their beds until they swelled up and couldn't leave them, that's all. Look at me. I've worked. Come into my cabin." Smoke followed him in. "Clean, eh? Everything in shape. You ought to see the floor in some of the cabins. Pigsties. As for me, I haven't eaten a meal off an unwashed dish. It meant work, and I've worked, and I haven't got the scurvy." "You're right," Smoke admitted. "But I see you've only 1 bunk. Why?" "It's easier to clean up for 1 than 2, that's why." The lazy blanket loafers. It was very convincing, but Smoke could not rid himself of his dislike of the man. "What's Laura Sibley got against you?" he asked abruptly. Amos Wentworth shot a quick look at him. "She's a crank," was the reply. A few minutes later, Smoke was talking with Laura Sibley. "What have you got against Wentworth?" he asked, with a suddenness that caught her off her guard. Her green eyes flashed bitterly. Her face, for the second, was convulsed with rage, but then, by a terrible effort, she controlled herself. "Because he's healthy," she panted. "Because he's supremely selfish. Because he won't lift a hand to help anybody else. That's the kind of a brute he is. But let him beware." 5 minutes afterward, coming out of the cabin to feed the dogs, Smoke saw her entering Amos Wentworth's cabin. "Something rotten here, Shorty, something rotten," he said, shaking his head. "Oh, sure, this seeress would rob a corpse. She's the hungriest-looking female I ever seen. Exercise has kept you and me and Wentworth in condition, Shorty. Now it's up to us to prescribe exercise for these hospital wrecks. I appoint you chief nurse." "What, me?" Shorty shouted. "I resign." "No, you don't. It's going to be hard. We've got to make them hustle. The strongest for the burial squad, then the next strongest on the firewood squad. And we mustn't forget spruce tea." In the next hour, each of the 20-odd cabins was raided. All ammunition and every rifle, shotgun, and revolver was confiscated. And this was only the beginning of the day. Men were persuaded, bullied, or dragged by main strength from their bunks and forced to dress. Smoke selected the mildest cases for the burial squad. Another squad was told to supply the wood. Still another squad had to chop firewood and supply every cabin. Those who were too weak for outdoor work were put to cleaning the cabins and washing clothes. One squad brought in loads of spruce bough, and every stove was used for making spruce tea. All the gangs groaned and sighed and wept, the tears streaming and freezing down their cheeks as they toiled, and their agony was real. The situation was desperate, and Smoke's prescription was heroic. When the work gangs came in at noon, they found decently cooked dinners awaiting them, prepared by the weaker members of their cabins under the guidance of Smoke and Shorty. "Too late," Amos Wentworth sneered at Smoke's efforts. "Come with me," Smoke answered. "Pick up those 2 pails. You're not ill." From cabin to cabin the 3 men went, dosing every man and woman with a full pint of spruce tea. It wasn't easy. Smoke caught the patient by the nose to make the mouth open. "Now, Shorty, down it goes." "Next time you'll take it easier," Smoke assured the victim, reaching for the nose of the next man. "I'd sooner take castor oil," was Shorty's private confidence after he downed his own portion. "We're giving this spruce tea 4 times a day, and there are 80 of you," Smoke informed Laura Sibley, "so we've no time to fool. Will you take it, or must I hold your nose?" I'll take it," she shivered. "Hurry up." That night, exhausted, as by no hard day of trail, Smoke and Shorty crawled into their blankets. "I'm fairly sick with it," Smoke confessed. "The way they suffer is awful. I wish we had a sack of raw potatoes." "The vital essential something is missing from that prepared food," Smoke went on. "The life has been evaporated out of it." In the morning, one of the stronger men who had worked on the firewood squad was found to have hanged himself. A nightmare procession of days set in. As Smoke was learning, exercise was the last thing in the world for scurvy patients. The burial squad was kept steadily at work. "You couldn't have selected a worse place for a camp," Smoke told Laura Sibley. "Look at it. At the bottom of a narrow gorge, the noon sun doesn't rise above the top of the wall. You haven't had sunlight for several months." "But how could I know?" He shrugged his shoulders. "I don't see why not, if you could lead 100 fools to a gold mine." Several minutes afterward, Smoke saw the seeress entering Amos Wentworth's cabin and followed her. At the door he could hear her voice, whimpering and pleading. "Just for me," she was begging as Smoke entered. "I won't tell a soul." Smoke was certain that he was on the edge of something. "Out with it," he commanded harshly. "What is it?" "What is what?" Amos Wentworth asked, and Smoke could not name what was what. The situation grew grimmer and grimmer. In that dark hole of a canyon, where sunlight never penetrated, the horrible death list mounted up. Each day, Smoke and Shorty examined each other's mouths for the whitening of the gums, the first symptom of the disease. "I've quit," Shorty announced one evening. "They go from bad to worse. Exercise isn't any good." "I've made up my mind to the same thing," Smoke answered. Another suicide was Shorty's news that following morning. The everlasting miracle of Wentworth's immunity perplexed Smoke. Why should he alone not have developed scurvy? Why did Laura Sibley hate him, and at the same time whine and beg from him? What was it she begged from him, and that he would not give? "Raw potatoes would cure everybody here," he remarked to the seeress. "I know it. I've seen it work before." There was light of conviction in her eyes, followed by bitterness and hatred. "Why didn't you bring in a supply of fresh potatoes on the steamer?" he asked. "We did, but coming up the river we sold them all out at Fort Yukon. We had plenty of evaporated kinds, and we knew they'd keep better. They wouldn't even freeze." "Now, mightn't there have been a couple of odd sacks left? Accidentally, you know, mislaid on the steamer." She shook her head and then added, "We never found any." "And Amos Wentworth did," he concluded. "And what is your private opinion? Do you think Wentworth has any raw potatoes hidden somewhere?" "No, certainly not. Why should he?" "Wentworth is a swine," was Shorty's verdict when Smoke told his suspicions. "And so is Laura Sibley," Smoke added. "She believes he has the potatoes and is keeping it quiet and trying to get him to share with her." "May God rot them dead with scurvy for their reward," Shorty cursed. But Smoke stood out for diplomacy. That night he went to Wentworth's unlighted cabin. "Listen to me, Wentworth," he said. "I've got $1,000 in dust right here in this sack. I'm a rich man in this country, and I can afford it. I think I'm getting touched. Put a raw potato in my hand and the dust is yours." Smoke heard him fumble in the blanket, and then felt pressed into his hand not the heavy gold sack, but the unmistakable potato, the size of a hen's egg, warm from contact with the other's body. Smoke did not wait till morning. He and Shorty were expecting at any time the deaths of their worst 2 cases, and to this cabin the partners went. Grated and mashed up in a cup was the $1,000 potato, a thick fluid that they fed, several drops at a time, into the frightful orifices that had once been mouths. Through the long night, Smoke and Shorty changed each other at giving the potato juice, that precious elixir. By evening of the next day, the change for the better in the 2 patients was miraculous and almost unbelievable. They were no longer the worst cases. In 48 hours, with the exhaustion of the potato, they were temporarily out of danger, though far from being cured. "Was that all the dust you had?" Wentworth asked. "Shorty and I scraped up all we had, but straight, he and I are worth several millions between us." "I don't have any potatoes," Wentworth said finally. "I wish I had. That potato I gave you was the only one. I'd been saving it all the winter for fear I'd get the scurvy. I only sold it so as to be able to buy a passage out of the country when the river opens." The untreated cases went from bad to worse. On the 4th morning, 3 horrible corpses were buried. Shorty turned to Smoke. "You tried your way. Now it's time for mine." He headed straight for Wentworth's cabin. What occurred there, Shorty never told. He emerged with knuckles skinned and bruised, and Wentworth's face bore all the marks of a bad beating. Next, Smoke and Shorty together invaded Wentworth's cabin, throwing him out in the snow while they turned the interior upside down. Laura Sibley frantically joined them in the search. "You won't get any, old girl, even if we find a ton," Shorty assured her. But she was no more disappointed than they. Though the very floor was dug up, they discovered nothing. "It's murder," Shorty held on. "He's murdering them all just as much as if he'd knocked their brains out with an axe, only worse." Another day passed, during which they kept a steady watch on Wentworth's movements. "They're cached right there in his cabin," Shorty said. "But where?" "We sure overhauled it. Come on and help me pull that hut down. I'd set fire to it, but that'll roast the potatoes." "That's it!" Smoke exploded as he rang to his feet. "Just what I was trying to remember. Where's that kerosene can?" "I'm with you, Shorty. The potatoes are ours." "What's the game?" "Watch me, that's all," Smoke said. "Now, what we're going to do came out of a book. I read it when I was a kid, and it will work. Come on." Several minutes later, the 2 men crept up to Amos Wentworth's cabin. Carefully and noiselessly they poured kerosene over the logs. Then the match was applied, and they watched the flaming oil. They drew back beyond the growing light and waited. They saw Wentworth rush out, stare wildly at the fire, and run back into the cabin. In a minute he emerged, his shoulders burdened by a sack heavy and unmistakable. Smoke and Shorty sprang at him like a pair of famished wolves. They hit him right and left at the same instant. He crumpled down under the weight of the sack. "Give me a dozen, only a dozen, half a dozen, and you can have the rest," Wentworth cried. "I was going to turn them over to you tomorrow. That was my idea. Their life." "Where's the other sack?" Smoke bluffed. "I ate it up," was the honest reply. "That sack's all that's left. Give me a few, you can have the rest." "Ate 'em up!" Shorty screamed. "A whole sack, and they're dying? This for you, and this?" "You swine!" Shorty went on, kicking. "Watch out for your toes," was Smoke's only interference. There was no sleep in camp that night. Hour after hour, Smoke and Shorty gave the life-renewing potato juice, a quarter of a spoonful at a dose, into the poor, ruined mouths of the population. And through the following day, while one slept, the other kept up the work. There were no more deaths. By the 3rd day, men who had not been off their backs for weeks crawled out of their bunks, and on that day the sun looked cheerfully over the crest of the canyon for the first time. "Not a potato," Shorty told the whining, begging Wentworth. "Knowing you, I've come to understand God. I always wondered why he let Satan live. Now I know. He let him live just as I let you live." "A word of advice," Smoke told Wentworth. "These men are getting well fast. Shorty and I are leaving in a week, and there will be nobody to protect you. There's the trail. Dawson's 18 days' travel." "Gentlemen, I beg of you, listen to me," Wentworth whined. "I'm a stranger in this country. I don't know the trail. I'll give you $1,000 if you let me travel with you." Shorty stiffened for a supreme effort. "I'm nobody. I'm a worm, a maggot, and child of the fly. I'm not afraid or ashamed of anything that creeps or crawls or stinks. But travel with that mistake of creation, "Go away, man. I'm not proud, but you turn my stomach." And Amos Wentworth went away, alone, dragging a sled loaded with provisions sufficient to last him to Dawson. A mile down the trail, Shorty overhauled him. "Come here to me," was Shorty's greeting. "Come across. Return it." "I don't understand." Wentworth shivered from recollection of the 2 beatings, hand and foot, he had already received from Shorty. "That $1,000, do you understand that? That $1,000 gold Smoke bought that potato with. Come through." And Amos Wentworth passed the gold sack over. "Hope a skunk bites you and you get hydrophobia," were the words of Shorty's farewell. A flutter in eggs. In the A.C. Company's big store at Dawson, on a morning of crisp frost, Lucille Aral called Smoke Bellew over to the dry goods counter. Smoke obeyed. Everyone would be flattered by the notice of Lucille Aral, the singing soubrette who performed nightly at the Palace Opera House. "Things are dead," she complained. "There hasn't been a stampede for a week. That masked ball has been postponed. There's always standing room now at the Opera House, and there hasn't been a mail from the outside for 2 weeks. In short, this town has gone to sleep. It needs livening, and you and I can do it. We can give it excitement. I've broken with Wild Water, you know." Smoke had 2 visions. One was of Joy Gastel. The other was of himself, beaten to death by the aforesaid Wild Water. Smoke's reluctance at raising excitement couldn't be missed by her. "I'm not thinking what you're thinking at all, thank you," she laughed. "Men have died of heart disease at the sudden announcement of good fortune," he murmured in relief. "Liar," she retorted. "You were more scared to death than anything else. Now, Mr. Smoke Bellew, I'm not going to make love to you. Besides, I haven't really broken with him." "Well, have you or haven't you?" "I haven't. There. But it's between you and me in confidence. He thinks I have. I made a noise like breaking with him, and he deserved it too." "Where do I come in?" "You make a pot of money. We put across the laugh on Wild Water and cheer Dawson up. And best of all, and the reason for it all, he gets discipline. He needs it. He broke out last night again. Sowed the floor of the M&M with gold dust. All of $1,000. Just scattered it under the feet of the dancers. You've heard of it, of course." "Yes, this morning. I'd like to be the sweeper in that establishment. But still, I don't get you. Where do I come in?" "Listen, he was too turbulent. I broke our engagement, and he's going around making a noise like a broken heart. Now we come to it. I like eggs." "But what have eggs and appetite got to do with it?" he demanded. "For heaven's sake, listen. I like eggs. There's only a limited supply of eggs in Dawson." "Sure, Slavovich's restaurant has most of them. Ham and 1 egg, $3. Ham and 2 eggs, $5. That means $2 an egg retail, and only the rich can afford them." "I have breakfast every morning at 11 o'clock at Slavovich's. I always eat 2 eggs." She paused impressively. Just suppose, somebody corners eggs." "Go on," he replied. "I give up. What's the answer?" "Stupid! You know Wild Water. When he sees I'm languishing for eggs, and I know his mind like a book, and I know how to languish, what will he do?" "You answer it. Go on." "Why, he'll buy the corner no matter what it costs. Picture, I come into Slavovich's at 11 o'clock. Wild Water will be there at the next table. He'll make it his business to be there. 2 eggs, shirred. I'll say to the waiter, 'Sorry, Miss Aral,' the waiter will say, 'there aren't any eggs.' Another picture, Slavovich himself bringing 2 shirred eggs to me and saying, 'Compliments of Mr. Wild Water, miss.'
What can I do? What can I possibly do but smile at Wild Water? And then we make up, of course, and he'll consider it cheap if he's been compelled to pay $10 for each and every egg." Go on, Smoke urged. "At what station do I climb onto these railway cars?" "You ride the egg train. You make that corner in eggs. You start today. You can buy every egg in Dawson for $3 and sell out to Wild Water at almost any price. And then afterward we'll let the inside history come out. The laugh will be on Wild Water. His turbulence will be somewhat subdued. You and I share the glory of it. You make a pile of money, and Dawson wakes up with a grand ha-ha."
"Hey, Shorty," Smoke called across the main street to his partner, who was walking along with a bottle with frozen contents tucked under his arm. Smoke crossed over. "Where have you been all morning? I've been looking for you everywhere." "Up to Doc's," Shorty answered, holding out the bottle. "Something's wrong with Sally. I've seen last night. The hair on her tail and flanks was falling out. The doc says—" "Late, Sally, wait. Listen to me. It's cruelty to animals. She'll be frostbitten. What are you in such a fever about anyway?" "Shorty, I want you to do me a favour. I want you to buy eggs for me." "Look here, Smoke, if you want to go in for high living, you go and buy your own eggs. Beans and bacon are good enough for me." "I'm going to buy, but I want you to help me. You go right straight to Slavovich's, pay as high as $3, but buy all he's got." $3, Shorty groaned, "and I heard only yesterday that he's got all of 700 in stock. $2,100 for eggs? Smoke, you run right up and see the doc, and he'll only charge you an ounce for the first prescription." He started off, but Smoke caught his partner by the shoulder. "Smoke, I'll do anything for you," Shorty protested earnestly. "If you had a cold in the head and was laying with both arms broke, I'd sit by your bedside day and night and wipe your nose for you, but I'll be damned if I'll throw 2,100 good iron dollars on eggs." "They're not your dollars, but mine, Shorty. What I'm after is to corner every blessed egg in Dawson and the Klondike on the Yukon. You've got to help me out. I'll tell you of the deal afterward, and I'll let you have half of it." "But he'll sure know I'm not going to eat 'em." "If he gets curious, tell him you're starting a chicken ranch. Off him up to 3 for them uncooked, and then nose out every egg in Dawson and buy it. Understand? I'm going over to Klondike City. There's an old man there who has 6 dozen. He's held them all winter to pay his passage back to Seattle. And they say that little woman down beyond the sawmill who makes moccasins has a couple of dozen." But Shorty showed the bottle. "I'm going to doctor up Sally first. The eggs can wait that long. They won't be eaten while I'm taking care of poor sick dog that saved your life and mine more'n once." Never was a market cornered more quickly. In 3 days, every egg known in Dawson, with the exception of several dozen, was in the hands of Smoke and Shorty. Smoke has given the old man in Klondike City $5 apiece for his 72 eggs. Shorty had bought most of the eggs, and he had driven bargains. He had given only $2 an egg to the woman who made moccasins, and he prided himself that he had come off fairly well with Slavovich, whose 715 eggs he had bought at a rate of $2.50. The several dozen not yet gathered were in the hands of 2 persons. One, with whom Shorty was dealing, was an Indian woman who lived in a cabin on the hill back of the hospital. "I'll get her today," Shorty announced next morning. "You wash the dishes, Smoke." In the afternoon, when Smoke returned to the cabin, he found Shorty on the floor, rubbing ointment into Sally's tail. "What luck?" Shorty asked carelessly, after several minutes had passed. "Nothing doing," Smoke answered. "How did you get on with the squaw?" Shorty cocked his head triumphantly toward a tin pail of eggs on the table. "For $7, he confessed. "I offered $10 finally," Smoke said, "and then the fella told me he'd already sold his eggs. Somebody else is in the market." He broke off to stare at his partner. A pronounced change was coming over Shorty. "Do you mind kindly just repeating over how many eggs you said the man didn't sell to you?" he asked. 28. "Well, please direct your handsome eyes at that pail on the table. See it?" Smoke nodded. "Well, I want to tell you one thing. There are exactly 28 eggs in that pail, and they cost, every one of them, just exactly 7 great big round iron dollars a throw." "Well, that guy was a big Indian, am I right?" Smoke nodded and continued to nod to each question. "He's got one cheek half gone where a bald-faced grizzly bit him, am I right? He's a dog trader, right, eh? His name is Scarface Jim. That's so, isn't it?" "You mean we've been bidding—" "Against each other. Sure thing. That squaw's his wife, and they keep house on the hill back of the hospital." "But it doesn't amount to anything," Smoke laughed. "We know that we got the corner. That's the big thing." Shorty spent the next hour wrestling with a stub of a pencil on a 3-year-old newspaper, and the more hieroglyphic grew his figures, the more cheerful he became. "There," he said at last, "let me give you the totals. Right now in our possession are exactly 973 eggs. They cost us exactly $2,760. If we stick up Wild Water for $10 an egg, we stand to win just exactly $6,970, and I'm in half of it." At 11 that night, Smoke was aroused from sleep by Shorty, whose fur parka exhaled an atmosphere of frost, and whose hand was extremely cold in its contact with Smoke's cheek. "What is it now?" Smoke grumbled. "Rest of Sally's hair has fallen out?" "No, but I just had to tell you the good news. Slavovich came to see me. He said to me, 'Shorty, I want to speak to you about eggs. I've kept it quiet. Nobody knows I sold them to you, but Wildwater Charlie is looking to buy eggs. He goes around to Slavovich and offers him $5 an egg, and before he quits, he's offering 8. Slavovich had to tell him he'd sold the eggs, but that the buyer was secret. 'Shorty,' he said to me, 'Wildwater'll come a-running. You can hold him up for $8. $8, your grandmother,' I say. 'He'll fall for 10 before I'm done with him.' Shorty, first thing in the morning, tip off Slavovich. Have him tell Wildwater that you and I are partners in the deal." In the morning, Smoke chanced upon Lucille Aral again at the dry goods counter of the AC store. "It's working," he jubilated. "It's working. Wildwater's been around to Slavovich trying to buy or bully eggs out of him. And by this time, Slavovich has told him that Shorty and I own the corner." Lucille Arrow's eyes sparkled with delight. "I'm going to breakfast right now," she cried, "and I'll ask the waiter for eggs, and be so sad when there aren't any as to melt a heart of stone. I know him, and hold out for a stiff figure. Nothing less than $10 will satisfy me, and if you sell for anything less, Smoke, I'll never forgive you." That noon, up in their cabin, Shorty placed on the table a pot of beans, a pot of coffee, a pan of biscuits, a tin of butter, and a tin of condensed cream, a smoking platter of moose meat and bacon, a plate of stewed dried peaches, and called, "Grub's ready. Look at Sally first." Smoke opened the door and saw Sally and Bright driving away a bunch of sled dogs that belonged to the next cabin. Also he saw something else that made him close the door hurriedly and dash back to the stove.
The frying pan, still hot from the moose meat and bacon, he put back on the front lid. Into the frying pan he put a generous piece of butter, then reached for an egg, which he broke and dropped spluttering into the pan. As he reached for a second egg, Shorty clutched his arm in an excited grip. "Hey, what are you doing?" he demanded. "Frying eggs," Smoke informed him, breaking the second one and throwing off Shorty's detaining hand. "Don't you feel well?" Shorty asked anxiously. "That's $30 worth of eggs already." "And I'm going to make it $60 worth," was the answer, as Smoke broke the fourth. "Get out of the way, Shorty. Wildwater's coming up the hill, and he'll be here in 5 minutes." Shorty sighed with relief and sat down at the table. By the time the expected knock came at the door, Smoke was facing him across the table, and before each was a plate containing 3 hot fried eggs. "Come in," Smoke called. Wildwater Charlie, a young giant just a fraction of an inch under 6 feet in height, and carrying a clean weight of 190 pounds, entered and shook hands. "Sit down and have a bite, Wildwater," Shorty invited. "Smoke, fry him some eggs." Smoke broke 3 more eggs into the hot pan, and in several minutes placed them before his guest, who looked at them with so strange and strained an expression that Shorty confessed afterwards his fear that Wildwater would slip them into his pocket and carry them away. "Say, that crisis down in the States has got nothing over us in the matter of eats," Shorty said. "Here we are, you and me and Smoke, getting $90 worth of eggs." They aren't worth $10, Wildwater said slowly. "I'm telling you what we can get for them. We're the Egg Trust, Smoke and me, and don't you forget it." He mopped his plate with a biscuit. "I could almost eat a couple more," he sighed, and then helped himself to the beans. "You can't eat eggs like that," Wildwater objected. It isn't right." "We're keen on eggs, Smoke and me," was Shorty's excuse. Wildwater finished his own plate in a half-hearted way and looked at the 2 comrades. "Say, you fellas can do me a great favor," he began. "Sell me or lend me or give me about a dozen of eggs." "Sure," Smoke answered, "but we're not so poor that we have to sell our hospitality. They'll cost you nothing." Here a sharp kick under the table showed him that Shorty was getting nervous. "A dozen, did you say, Wildwater?" Wildwater nodded. "Go ahead, Shorty," Smoke went on. "Cook them up for him. I've seen the time myself when I could eat a dozen." But Wildwater laid a restraining hand on Shorty as he explained, "I don't mean cooked. I want them with the shells on." "So that you can carry them away?" "That's the idea." Smoke nodded. "That's different, Wildwater. I thought you just wanted to eat them. You see, we went into this for a speculation." The dangerous blue of Wildwater's eyes began to grow more dangerous. "I'll pay you for them," he said sharply. "How much?" "Oh, not a dozen," Smoke replied. "We couldn't sell a dozen. We're not retailers. We're speculators. When we sell out, it's the whole corner or nothing." "How many have you got, and how much do you want for them?" "How many have we got, Shorty?" Smoke inquired. Shorty performed arithmetic out loud. 973 minus 9, that leaves 962. At 10 a throw, we'll tote up just about 9,620 iron dollars. Of course, Wildwater, we're plain fair, and it's money back for bad ones, though that's one thing I never seen in the Klondike, a bad egg." Wildwater shook his head sadly. "That would be too expensive, Shorty. I'll give you $10 for a couple of dozen. I'll give you 20, but I can't buy them all." "All or none," was Smoke's ultimatum. "Look here, you two," Wildwater said in a burst of confidence. "You know Miss Aral and I were engaged. Well, she's broken everything off. Everybody knows it. It's for her I want the eggs." "Huh,"
Shorty cried. "But I never thought it of you." "Thought what?" "It's mean, that's what it is," Shorty rushed on, indignant. "I wouldn't wonder somebody filled you full of lead for it, and you deserve it, too." Wildwater began to flame toward one of his rages. His hands clenched until the cheap fork in one of them began to bend. "Now look here, Shorty, just what do you mean?" "I mean what I mean," Shorty retorted, "and you can't throw them any other way." "Throw what?" "Eggs. Anything. But you're making a mistake. No crowd at the Opera House will stand for it. Just because she's an actress is no reason you can publicly throw eggs at her." For the moment it seemed that Wildwater was going to have apoplexy. He gulped down a mouthful of hot coffee and slowly recovered himself. "You're wrong, Shorty," he said. "I'm not going to throw eggs at her. I want to give eggs to her. On a platter. Shared. That's the way she likes them." "Do you want 'em $9,620 worth?" Shorty asked. "Ah, listen to reason," Wildwater pleaded. "I only want a couple of dozen. I'll give you 20 apiece for 'em." "You know what they'll cost you, $9,620. "But maybe they won't turn the trick," Wildwater objected. "Maybe Miss Arrol's lost her taste for eggs by this time." "I would say Miss Arrol's worth the price of the eggs," Smoke put in quietly. "Worth it?" Wildwater stood up. "She's worth $1 million. She's worth all I've got. She's worth all the dust in the Klondike." He sat down and went on in a calmer voice. "Now, I've got a proposition. Lend me a couple of dozen of eggs. I'll turn 'em over to Slavovich. He'll feed 'em to her with my compliments. She hasn't smiled to me for 100 years. If eggs get a smile for me, I'll take them all off your hands." "Will you sign a contract to that effect?" Smoke said quickly, for he knew that Lucille Arral had agreed to smile. Wildwater gasped. "You're very quick with business here," he said. Smoke immediately wrote out the document where Wildwater agreed to take every egg delivered to him at $10 per egg, provided that the 2 dozen advanced to him brought about a reconciliation with Lucille Arral. Wildwater paused with uplifted pen. "Hold on," he said. "When I buy eggs, I buy good eggs. If I find one bad egg, you've got to come back with the 10 I paid for it." "That's all right," Smoke placated. "It's only fair." "And every bad egg you come back with, I'll eat," Shorty declared. Smoke inserted the word "good" in the contract, and Wildwater signed, received 2 dozen in a tin pail, and opened the door. "Goodbye, you robbers!" He slammed the door. Smoke was a witness to the play next morning in Slavovich's. He sat, as Wildwater's guest, at the table adjoining Lucille Arral's. "Haven't you found any eggs yet?" she murmured to the waiter.
"No, ma'am," came the answer. "They say somebody cornered every egg in Dawson. Mr. Slavovich is trying to buy a few just especially for you."
At that moment, Wildwater called the proprietor to him. "Look here, Slavovich," Wildwater whispered hoarsely. "I gave a couple of dozen eggs to you last night. Where are they?" "In the safe. All but that 6 I have ready for you any time. Share them up and present 'em to Miss Arral there, and don't forget, compliments of me," Wildwater concluded, relaxing his clutch on the proprietor's shoulder. Pretty Lucille Arral was looking forlornly at the strip of breakfast bacon and the tinned mashed potatoes on her plate when Slavovich placed before her 2 shirred eggs.
"Compliments of Mr. Wildwater,"
they at the next table heard him say. Smoke said to himself that it was fine acting. The quick flash in the face of her, the impulsive turn of the head, the spontaneous hint of a smile that was only checked by a superb self-control. Smoke felt the kick of Wildwater's moccasined foot under the table.
"Will she eat 'em? That's the question. Will she eat them?"
the latter whispered agonizingly. And with sidelong glances they saw Lucille Aral hesitate, almost push the dish from her, then surrender.
"I'll take the eggs," Wildwater said to Smoke. "The contract holds."
"Did you see her? She almost smiled." "I know her. It's all fixed. 2 more eggs tomorrow, and she'll forgive and make up. Smoke, I'm so grateful." Smoke returned jubilantly up the hill to the cabin, only to find Shorty in black despair.
"Go away and don't talk to me,"
were the first words Smoke received. But Shorty soon made a speech. "It's all off," he groaned. "The corner's busted. They'll be selling sherry and egg in all the saloons tomorrow at $1 a flip. What do you think I ran into? A guy with 3,000 eggs. Do you get me? 3,000, and just freighted in from 40 Mile.
"Fairy stories," Smoke doubted.
"I seen the eggs. Gattero's his name, a big, blue-eyed French-Canadian husky. He jabbed me straight to the heart. There were his dog teams, just pulled in from 40 Mile, and on the sleds were soap boxes. Eggs, full of 'em, all packed in sawdust. Do you know what he said to me? That they were all ours at $10 an egg. Do you know what he was doing when I left his cabin? Drawing a sign of eggs for sale. Said he'd give us first choice at $10 a throw, till 2 p.m. After that, he'd bust the market." "Let me think a moment," Smoke said cheerfully. "Quick action and team play is all that's needed. I'll get Wildwater here at 2 o'clock to take delivery of eggs. You buy that Gotero's eggs, even if you pay $10 apiece for 'em. Wildwater will take them off our hands at the same price. If you can get them cheaper, we'll make a profit as well. Now go to it. Borrow Colonel Bowie's dogs and take our team. Have them here by 2 sharp." Smoke found Wildwater at the M&M. "I warn you, we've picked up some more eggs," Smoke said, after Wildwater had agreed to bring his dust to the cabin at 2 o'clock and pay on delivery. "Now, how many eggs have you got now?" Smoke consulted his notebook. "According to Shorty's figures, we've 3,962 eggs. Multiply by 10... $40,000, Wildwater bellowed. "I won't stand for it." Smoke drew the contract from his pocket and pointed at "Pay on delivery." No mention is made of the number of eggs to be delivered. A signed contract is a signed contract. Honestly, Wildwater, we didn't know about those other eggs until afterward. Then we had to buy them in order to make our corner good." For 5 long minutes, in silence, Wildwater fought a battle with himself, then reluctantly gave in. "I'm in bad," he said brokenly. $40,000. "It's only 39,620, Smoke corrected. "But where'll I cash 'em? "Never mind, I'll be there. But as long as I live, I'll never eat another egg. I'm full sick of them." At 1:30, Shorty arrived with Gotero's eggs. "We near double our winnings," Shorty told Smoke, as they piled the soap boxes inside the cabin. "I hold 'em down to $8. Now that's $2 clear profit to us for each egg. And they 3,000 of them. I paid in full. Here's the receipt." While Smoke got out the gold scales and prepared for business, Shorty devoted himself to calculation. "We win $12,970, he announced triumphantly. "And we do Wildwater no harm. He wins, Miss Arrol. Beside, he gets all the eggs. Nobody loses." Promptly, at 2 o'clock, Shorty saw Wildwater coming up the hill. When he entered, he was brisk and businesslike. He took off his big bearskin coat, hung it on a nail, and sat down at the table. "Bring the eggs, you pirates," he commenced. When 200 had been reached, Wildwater suddenly cracked an egg on the edge of the table and opened it deftly with his thumbs. "Hey, hold on," Shorty objected.
"It's my egg, isn't it?" Wildwater snarled. "When I pay $10 an egg, I want to know what I'm getting." "If you don't like it, I'll eat it," Shorty volunteered. Wildwater looked and smelled and shook his head. "No, you don't, Shorty. That's a good egg. Give me the pail. I'm going to eat it myself for supper." Thrice again Wildwater cracked good eggs experimentally and put them in the pail beside him. $9,620. I'll pay for it now. Write a receipt, Smoke, he said at the end of the count. "Why not count the rest," Smoke suggested, "and pay all at once?" Wildwater shook his head. "I'm no good at figures." Going to his fur coat, from each of the side pockets he drew forth 2 sacks of dust, so fat and long that they resembled bologna sausages. A soapbox was carried to the table, and the count of 3,000 began. At the end of 100, Wildwater struck an egg sharply against the edge of the table. There was no crack. The sound was like that of striking a sphere of solid marble. "Frozen solid," he remarked, striking more sharply. "It ought to be solid. It's just been freighted up from 40 Mile. It'll take an axe to bust it," said Shorty. Smoke brought the axe, and Wildwater, with a clever hand and eye of the woodsman, split the egg cleanly in half. The appearance of the egg's interior was anything but satisfactory. Smoke felt a chill. Shorty held one of the halves to his nose. "It smells all right," he said. "But looks all wrong," Wildwater retorted. "And how can it smell when the smell's frozen along with the rest of it? Wait a minute." He put the 2 halves into a frying pan and placed the latter on the hot stove. Then the 3 men waited in silence. Slowly an unmistakable odour began to drift through the room. "Throw it out," Smoke cried, gasping. "What's the good?" asked Wildwater. "We've got to sample the rest." "Not in this cabin," Smoke coughed. "Chop them open and we can test by looking at them. Throw it out, Shorty, and leave the door open." Box after box was opened. Egg after egg, chosen at random, was chopped in 2, and every egg was hopeless decay. "I won't ask you to eat 'em, Shorty," Wildwater jeered. Smoke helped in loading the sled. Shorty sat at the table. "Say, how long have you been holding that corner?" was Wildwater's parting joke. Smoke made no reply, and, with one glance at his absorbed partner, proceeded to throw the soap-boxes out in the snow. "Say, Shorty, how much did you pay for that 3,000? Smoke asked gently. $8. Go away. Don't talk to me. We lost 17,000 on the flutter." Smoke thought for a few minutes, then again broke silence. "Say, Shorty, $40,000 gold weighs 200 pounds. Wildwater borrowed our sled and team to haul away his eggs. He came up the hill without a sled. Those 2 sacks of dust in his coat pockets weighed about 20 pounds each. He brought enough dust to pay for the good eggs. He never expected to pay for those 3,000. How did he know they were bad?" Shorty paused. A child could answer it. "We lose 17,000. Wildwater wins 17,000. The eggs of Goterows were Wildwater's all the time." "Why didn't you find out whether those eggs were good before you paid for them?" "Just as easy as the first question. Wildwater timed it to seconds. I'd no time to examine the eggs, and now, Smoke, what was the party's name that put this egg corner idea in your head?" Smoke was beginning the preparation of supper when Colonel Bowie knocked at the door, handed Smoke a letter, and went on to his own cabin. "Did you see his face?" Shorty raved. "He was almost busting to keep it straight. It's the big ha-ha for you and me, Smoke. We'll never dare show our faces in Dawson again." The letter was from Wildwater, and Smoke read it aloud. "Dear Smoke and Shorty, I write to ask your presence at a supper tonight at Slavovich's. Miss Arrol will be there, and so will Gotero. We were partners at Circle 5 years ago. He is all right and is going to be best man. About the eggs. They came into the country 4 years ago. They were bad when they came in. They were bad when they left California. They always were bad. Don't keep them in a hot room. Lucille says to say you and her and me has sure made some excitement for Dawson. And I say the drinks are on you, and that goes. Respectfully, your friend, W.W. Well, we accept the invitation, of course, Smoke asked. I've got one thing to say, Shorty answered. Wildwater will never suffer if he goes broke. He's a good actor. My figures are all wrong. Wildwater wins more than 17,000. We have made him a present of every good egg in the Klondike. 964 of 'em, and I got a last thing to say. You and me are practical gold miners, but when it comes to finance, we sure the fattest suckers. After this, it's you and me for the high rocks and tall timber, and if you ever mention eggs to me, we end our partnership. Get me? The townsite of Tralee. Smoke and Shorty met at the corner where stood the Elkhorn Saloon. Smoke's face was pleased, and he was walking quickly. Shorty looked depressed. "Where are you going?" Smoke asked. "Don't know," came the answer. "Nothing interesting anywhere. I've set 2 hours in the game of draw. Nothing exciting. Played with Skiff Mitchell for the drinks, and now I'm so bored that I'm walking the streets on the chance of seeing a dogfight, or an argument or something." "I got something better on hand," Smoke answered. "That's why I was looking for you. Come with me." "Now?" "Sure." "Where to?" "Across the river to make a call on old Dwight Sanderson." "Never heard of him," Shorty said, "and never heard of anyone living across the river. What's he want to live there for?" "He's got something to sell," Smoke laughed. "Dogs? A gold mine? Tobacco? Rubber boots?" Smoke shook his head to each question. "Don't tell me it's eggs," Shorty cried, his face twisted into an expression of sarcastic alarm. "Come on along," Smoke told him, "and I'll give you 10 guesses while we're crossing the ice." They came out upon the ice-covered Yukon. 3/4 of a mile away, directly opposite, the other bank rose in hundreds of feet in height. Shorty trudged at Smoke's heels, spending the time on guesses. "Hold on. I quit, and I don't go in on the deal till I see it and size it up. What is it?" "Well, you'll know soon enough. Do you see the smoke from that cabin? That's where Dwight Sanderson lives. He's holding down a townsite location." "Say," Shorty's hand, with an abrupt shoulder grip, brought his comrade to a halt. "You aren't telling me you're buying a townsite at this place?" "That's your 10th guess, and you win. Come on." "But wait a moment," Shorty pleaded. "Look at it. Nothing but bluffs and slides, all up and down. Where could the town stand?" "Come on. We've got to climb this slide." Think of a townsite here. There isn't a flat space big enough for a postage stamp. Say, Smoke, you're a meat-eater. I know that, and I know you aren't buying it for a town. Then what in heaven's name are you buying it for? To sell, of course. But other folks aren't as crazy as old man Sanderson and you. Maybe not in the same way, Shorty. Now I'm going to take this townsite, break it up in parcels, and sell it to a lot of sane people who live over in Dawson. All Dawson's still laughing at you and me and the eggs. You want to make them laugh some more? Certainly. But it's too expensive, Smoke. My share of the laugh cost me nearly $9,000. All right. You don't have to come in on this. The profits will be all mine, but you've got to help me just the same. What's old Sanderson holding at? A couple of hundred? 10,000. I ought to get it for 5. Come in, they heard Dwight Sanderson yell irritably when they knocked at his door, and they entered to find him by a stone fireplace.
"What do you want?" he demanded harshly.
"To talk business," Smoke answered. "You've a townsite located here, I understand. What do you want for it?"
$10,000, came the answer. "And now that I've told you, you can laugh and get out. There's the door. Goodbye."
"But I don't want to laugh. I want to buy your townsite."
"You do? Why, I'm glad to hear sense."
Sanderson came over and sat down facing his visitors. To show his indifference, he drummed with his knuckles on the table. A minute later, he began to hum a monotonous tra-la-loo, tra-la-lee, tra-la-lee, tra-la-loo. "Now look here, Mr. Sanderson," said Smoke. "This townsite isn't worth 10,000. Sanderson drummed with his knuckles.
"How much will you offer?"
he asked of Smoke. 5,000. Shorty groaned.
"You aren't a fool," Sanderson announced to Smoke. "Yet you offer 5,000 for it. Then it is worth something."
"You can't make 20 cents out of it," Smoke replied heatedly.
"I'll make it out of you."
"No, you won't."
"Then I reckon I'll stay here," Sanderson answered with an air of finality.
He took no further notice of his guests and went about his culinary tasks as if he were alone. When he had warmed over a pot of beans and a slab of sourdough bread, he set the table for one and proceeded to eat. "Let's see your papers," Smoke said at last. Sanderson fumbled under the head of his bunk and tossed out a package of documents.
"It's all in right," he said. "That long one there, with the big seals, come all the way from Ottawa. The National Canadian Government cinches me in the possession of this town site."
"How many lots you sold in the 2 years you've had it?" Shorty asked.
"None of your business," Sanderson answered sourly.
"I'll give you 5,000, Smoke said. Sanderson shook his head. "I don't know which is the craziest," Shorty decided. "Come outside a minute, Smoke. I want to whisper to you." Smoke yielded. "There are miles and miles of cliffs on both sides of this fool townsite that belong to nobody, and that you can have," Shorty said, as they stood in the snow outside the door. "They won't do," Smoke answered.
"Why?"
"It makes you wonder, doesn't it?"
"It sure does," Shorty agreed.
"And that's the very point," Smoke went on triumphantly. "If it makes you wonder, it will make others wonder, and when they wonder, they'll come running. By your own wondering, you prove it's sound psychology. Now, Shorty, I'm going to hand Dawson a package that will knock out the egg laugh."
"Hello," said Sanderson as they re-entered.
"Now, what is your lowest figure?" Smoke asked.
20,000.
"I'll give you 10,000.
"All right, I'll sell at that figure. It's all I wanted in the first place. But when will you pay the dust over?"
"Tomorrow, at the Northwest Bank. But there are 2 other things I want for that 10,000. In the first place, when you receive your money, you go to 40 Mile and stay there the rest of the winter."
"That's easy. What else?"
"I'm going to pay you 25,000, and you rebate me 15 of it."
"I'm agreeable," Sanderson turned to Shorty. "Folks said I was a fool when I came over here and town-sited. Well, I'm a $10,000 fool, aren't I?"
The next morning, the legal transfer of Dwight Sanderson's townsite was made. Henceforth to be known as the townsite of Tralee, Smoke added in the document. Also, at the Northwest Bank, 25,000 of Smoke's gold was weighed out by the cashier, while 6 casual onlookers noted the weighing, the amount, and the recipient. In a mining camp, all men are suspicious. Any act of any man is likely to be a secret gold strike, when the act is no more than a hunting trip for a moose, or a walk to observe the aurora borealis. And when it became known that Smoke Bellew had paid $25,000 to old Dwight Sanderson, Dawson wanted to know what he had paid it for. Wherever Smoke moved, he was observed by many eyes. And as proof that he was taken seriously, not one of his acquaintances asked him about his deal with Dwight Sanderson. On the other hand, no one mentioned eggs to Smoke. Shorty was under similar surveillance.
"Makes me feel like I killed somebody who had smallpox the way they watch me and seem afraid to speak,"
Shorty confessed when he chanced to meet Smoke in front of the Elkhorn. When Shorty fed the dogs that evening, he felt that from the darkness a dozen pair of eyes were looking at him. According to program, Smoke ate supper downtown and then proceeded to enjoy himself. Wherever he appeared, he was the center of interest, and he purposely made the rounds. Saloons filled up after his entrance and emptied following his departure. If he bought chips at a sleepy roulette table, within 5 minutes a dozen players were around him. He avenged himself on Lucie Laral by getting up and leaving the opera house just as she came in to sing her most popular song. In 3 minutes, 2/3 of her audience had vanished after him. At 1 in the morning he walked along an unusually crowded main street and took the turning to his cabin. And when he paused on the ascent, he could hear behind him the crunch of moccasins in the snow. For an hour the cabin was in darkness. Then he lighted a candle, and, after a delay, he and Shorty opened the door and began harnessing the dogs. A soft whistle went up from not far away. This whistle was repeated down the hill. "Listen to it," Smoke chuckled. "I'll bet you there are 40 men right now rolling out their blankets and climbing into their pants."
"Aren't folks fools?" Shorty giggled back. "An hour before we start down the hill, I want to announce, if you're still agreeable, that I come in half on this deal."
The sled was lightly loaded with a sleeping and grub outfit. A small coil of steel cable protruded from under the grub sack, while a crowbar lay half hidden along the bottom of the sled. Shorty whispered, "I sure do some thinking myself, seeing these objects on a sled on a dark night." They drove the dogs down the hill, then turned the team north along Main Street, away from the business part of town. They had seen no one, yet when this change of direction happened, out of the dim starlit darkness behind arose a whistle. Past the sawmill and the hospital, at lively speed, they went for a 1/4 of a mile. Then they turned about and headed back over the ground they had just covered. At the end of the first 100 yards, they barely missed colliding with 5 men racing along at a quick trot. One of them stopped Smoke's lead dog, and the rest gathered round. "What are you doing out this time of night?" Smoke inquired. "Strolling?" Before Bill Saltman could make reply, 2 running men joined the group. These were followed by several more. "Who are your friends?" Smoke asked. "Where's the stampede?"
"Just heard a rumor, that's all,"
Saltman mumbled with secretiveness. "You might tell everything to Shorty and me." "Where are you going?" Saltman demanded. "And who are you?" Smoke countered. "Committee of Safety?"
"Just interested," Saltman said.
"Say," Shorty put in, "I wonder who's feeling the greatest fool." Everybody laughed nervously. "Come on, Shorty," Smoke said. The crowd formed in behind and followed. And the sled with Smoke in the lead and Shorty at the pole went down Main Street escorted by men with stampeding packs. It was 3 in the morning. Half an hour later the hill was climbed and the dogs unharnessed at the cabin door. The 60 stampeders grimly attendant. "Good night, fellows," Smoke called as he closed the door. In 5 minutes the candle was put out. But before half an hour had passed, Smoke and Shorty emerged softly and without lights began harnessing the dogs. "Hello, Smoke," Saltman said, stepping near. "Can't shake you, Bill, I see," Smoke replied cheerfully. "Where are your friends?"
"Gone to have a drink. They left me to keep an eye on you. What's in the wind, anyway, Smoke? We're all your friends, you know that."
"Bill, You better go to bed. Good night, Smoke evaded. There's not going to be good night, Smoke. Look here, Bill, Smoke said. I'll make you a proposition. Do you want to come in alone on this? Saltman did not hesitate. And throw the gang down? No, sir. We all come in. You first, then, Smoke exclaimed, throwing the other into deep snow beside the trail. Shorty drove the dogs to the south on the trail that led to the rear of Dawson. Smoke and Saltman, locked together, rolled in the snow. Smoke considered himself in best condition, but Saltman outweighed him by 50 pounds, and repeatedly mastered him. Time and time again he got Smoke on his back, and Smoke lay and rested. But each time Saltman attempted to get off him and get away, Smoke reached out the hand that brought about a new clinch and wrestle. "You can go some," Saltman acknowledged, as he sat on Smoke's chest, "but I down you every time." "And I hold you every time," Smoke panted back. "That's what I'm here for, just to hold you. Where do you think Shorty's getting to all this time?" Saltman made a wild effort to go clear, but Smoke gripped his ankle and threw him in a headlong tumble. From down the hill came questioning whistles. Saltman sat up and whistled an answer, and Smoke rolled him face upward and sat on his chest, his knees resting on Saltman's biceps, his hands on Saltman's shoulders and holding him down. In this position the stampeders found them. Smoke laughed and got up. "Well, good night, fellows," he said, and started down the hill, with 60 exasperated stampeders at his heels. He turned north and took the river trail. Circling the Indian village, he held on to the mouth of Moose Creek and turned and then faced his pursuers. "You make me tired," he said, with a good imitation of a snarl, as he passed among them on the back trail to Dawson. Straight down Main Street he headed, crossing the ice of the Klondike River. At 8 o'clock, as grey dawn began to show, he led his weary gang to Slavovich's restaurant, where tables were ready for breakfast. "Good night, fellows," he said as he took the climb of the hill. In the clear light of day they did not follow him, contenting themselves with watching him up the hill to his cabin. For 2 days Smoke walked about town, continually under espionage. Shorty, with the sled and dogs, had disappeared. No travellers had seen him. Remained only Smoke, who, soon or late, was certain to try to connect with his missing partner. And upon Smoke everybody's attention was centred. On the second night he did not leave his cabin, putting out the lamp at 9 in the evening, and setting the alarm for 2 next morning. The watch outside heard the alarm go off, so that when he emerged from the cabin, he found waiting for him a band of at least 300. Thus hugely escorted, he walked down to town and entered the Elkhorn. The place was immediately packed, and the crowd for 4 hours watched Smoke play cards with his old friend Breck. Shortly after 6 in the morning, Smoke left the Elkhorn and went up Main Street with the 300 behind him. "Good night, fellows," he said bitterly. "I'm going to get breakfast and then go to bed." The 300 shouted that they were with him, and followed him upon the frozen river on the direct path he took for Tralee. At 7 in the morning he led his stampeding cohorts across the face of the slide that led to Dwight Sanderson's cabin. Shorty threw open the door. "Come on in, Smoke," he greeted. "Breakfast's ready. Who are all your friends?" Smoke turned about. "Well, good night, fellas. Hope you enjoyed your walk." "Hold on a moment, Smoke," Bill Saltzman cried with disappointment. "Want to talk with you." "Fire away," Smoke answered. "What did you pay old Sanderson 25,000 for? Will you answer that?" "Bill, you give me a pain," was Smoke's reply.
I came over here for a country residence, and I'm looking for peace and quietness, and you and a gang trying to cross-examine me." "You haven't answered the question," Bill Saltman came back. "And I'm not going to, Bill. That's a personal affair between Dwight Sanderson and me." The door closed. "Well, what are we going to do now?" someone asked. "Me for breakfast," Wildwater Charlie said cheerfully. "You let us up this blind alley this time, Bill." At 8:30, Shorty opened the door and peered out. "They all hiked back to Dawson," he explained. "I thought they were going to camp here." "Don't worry, they'll come back," Smoke reassured him. "Now, lend me a hand. We've got work to do." At the end of an hour, Shorty saw the result of their toil. A windlass in the corner of the cabin, with an endless rope that ran around double log rollers. Smoke turned it with a minimum of effort, and the rope slipped and creaked. "Now, Shorty, go outside and tell me what it sounds like." Shorty, listening at the closed door, heard all the sounds of a windlass hoisting a load, and caught himself trying to estimate the depth of the shaft. Next came a pause, and in his mind's eye he saw the bucket swinging. Then he heard the dull sound as of the bucket coming to abrupt rest on the edge of the shaft. He threw open the door, smiling. "I got you," he cried. "I almost fell for it myself. What next?" The next was the dragging into the cabin of a dozen sled loads of rock. And there were many other nexts. "Leave the dogs with Breck in Dawson this evening," Smoke instructed when supper was finished. "They'll be watching what you do, so get Breck to go to the AC Company and buy up all the blasting powder. There's only several £100 in stock, and have Breck order 6 hard rock drills from the blacksmith. And give Breck these location descriptions, so that he can record them at the Gold Commissioner's tomorrow. And at 10 o'clock, you be on Main Street listening. I don't want them to be too loud. Dawson must just hear them and no more." At 10 that night, Shorty, aware of many curious eyes, heard a distant explosion. 30 seconds later, there was a second, to attract the attention of others on the street. Then came a third, so violent that it rattled the windows and brought the inhabitants into the street. "Shook 'em up beautiful," Shorty proclaimed when he arrived at the cabin on Tralee. He gripped Smoke's hand. "Dawson's just like an ant-hole. You won't see Tralee tomorrow for folks." Smoke made a couple of creaking turns by the fake windlass. Shorty made peepholes on every side of the cabin, then he blew out the candle. "Now," he whispered at the end of half an hour. Smoke turned the windlass slowly, paused after several minutes, took a bucket filled with earth, and struck it against the heap of rocks. "There are 3 of 'em," Shorty whispered. Smoke glowed his cigarette and glanced at his watch. "We got to do this thing regularly," Smoke breathed. He struck a chisel on a rock. "Beautiful, beautiful," Shorty said with delight. "They've got their heads together talking." And until 4 in the morning, at 15-minute intervals, the windlass creaked and ran around on itself and hoisted nothing. Then their visitors departed, and Smoke and Shorty went to bed. After daylight, Shorty examined the moccasin marks. Smoke looked out over the river. "Get ready for visitors. There are 2 crossing the ice now." "Huh, wait till 9 o'clock. There'll be 2,000. "The source of the Klondike placers found at last," Smoke laughed. Shorty gazed at the strip they had staked. "It sure looks like a true Fisher vein," he said. "It'd fool anybody." When the 2 men crossing the river climbed the zigzag trail up the slide, they found a closed cabin. Bill Saltman went softly to the door, listened, then called Wildwater Charlie up to him. From inside came the creak and whine of the windlass bearing a heavy load.
Then they heard the impact of a bucket on rock. Wildwater knocked on the door. At the end of 5 minutes, Smoke, breathing heavily, opened the door an inch. They saw on his face and shirt powdered rock fragments. He confronted the visitors outside in the snow. Their quick eyes noted his shirt, discoloured and powdery, and the knees of his overalls that showed signs of dirt. "What brings you across the river? Going hunting?" "You'd just as well come through, Smoke," Wildwater said confidently. "You've got something here." "If you're looking for eggs," Smoke began. "Ah, forget it. We mean business." "You mean you want to buy lots?" Smoke rattled on. "There's some dandy building sites here, but we can't sell yet. Come next week, Wildwater, and for peace and quietness I'll show you something swell. Next week it'll be surveyed. Goodbye." Still talking and shaking their hands, he stepped inside and closed the door. They looked at each other and nodded significantly. Wildwater's eyes wandered up the snow-covered ravine until they were halted by something that brought a whistle to his lips. "Whew. Just look there, Bill. See where I'm pointing? If that isn't a prospect hole, it's a fissure vein, all right." "And look at the size of it," Saltman cried. "And the hole slides on the mouth of the vein as well." "Keep looking on. Out on the ice there, on the trail," Saltzman directed. "Most of Dawson, isn't it?" Wildwater saw the trail black with men. "Well, I'm going to look at that prospect hole before they get here," he said, turning and starting up the ravine. But the cabin door opened, and the 2 occupants stepped out. "Hey!" Smoke called. "Where are you going?" "To pick out a lot," Wildwater called back. "Look at the river. All Dawson stampeding to buy lots." "It sure looks like it'll be popular," Saltman corroborated. "We're not selling lots over in that section where you're heading," Smoke answered. "This section, running from the river and over the tops, is reserved, so come back." "We'll stroll anyways," Saltman replied stubbornly. "I warn you, you're trespassing," was Smoke's final word. "No, just strolling," Saltman gaily retorted, turning his back and starting on. "Hey, stop in your tracks, Bill," Shorty thundered, drawing and levelling 2 Colt 44s. "Make another step and I'll let 11 holes through your carcass. Get that?" Saltman stopped, perplexed. "I can't shoot," Shorty mumbled to Smoke. "What'll I do?" "Look here, Shorty, listen to reason," Saltman begged. "You can't call a man a trespasser when he's on a townsite looking to buy lots." Wildwater was arguing, and Shorty was objecting. "But they're private property. I tell you again, it isn't for sale." The line ran along the ravine, and Shorty halted the first arrivals when they got that far in their invasion. And the crowd were 6 policemen and a lieutenant. With the latter, Smoke conferred in undertones. "They're still coming out of Dawson," he said, "and before long there will be 5,000 here. There are only 5 claims. It means 1,000 men to a claim. Besides, those 5 claims were recorded this morning and can't be jumped. In short, claim jumping mustn't start." "We can't have any trouble here, and we won't have," said the lieutenant, "but you'd better talk to them." "There must be some mistake, fellows," Smoke began in a loud voice. "We're not ready to sell lots. The streets are not surveyed yet, but next week we shall have the grand opening sale." He was interrupted by an outburst of impatience and indignation. "We don't want lots," a young miner cried out. "We come for what's under the ground." "We don't know what we've got under the ground," Smoke answered, "but we do know we've got a fine townsite on top of it." Again the impatient cries arose, and Saltman came to the front. "We're here to stake claims," he opened. "We know what you've done. Filed a string of 5 quartz claims, and they're over there, across the townsite on a line of the slide and the canyon. Only you misplayed. 2 of the entries are fake. Who was Seth Bierce? No one ever heard of him. You filed a claim this in his name, and you filed a claim in the name of Harry Maxwell, but he isn't in the country.
2 claims are open to relocation."
Saltman turned to encourage a following, when the police lieutenant's voice stopped the forward surge of the great mass.
"Hold on there. You can't do that."
"Can't?" said Bill Saltman. "The law says a fake location can be relocated, doesn't it?"
"That's right, Bill," the crowd cheered.
"It may be the law," came the steady answer, "but I can't and won't allow a mob of 5,000 men to attempt to jump 2 claims. It would be a dangerous riot. The next man who crosses that line will be shot."
"Heavens," the lieutenant whispered to Smoke. "Look at them like flies on the edge of the cliff there. Any disorder in that mass would force hundreds of them over."
Smoke got up.
"Fellows, if you insist on town lots, I'll sell them to you, 100 apiece, when the survey is made." "We don't want lots," a voice went up. "We want to relocate."
"But there are only 2 disputed claims," Smoke argued.
"When they're relocated, where will the rest of you be?"
He mopped his forehead with his shirt sleeve, and another voice cried out,
"Let us all in, share and share alike."
Those who roared their agreement didn't know that the suggestion had been made by a man primed to make it when he saw Smoke mop his forehead.
"Pool the townsite," the man went on. "Pool the mineral rights with the townsite, too."
"Fellows, you're forcing me," Smoke said. His indecision was so clear that the crowd swept him on to agreement.
"Bill Saltman here and Wildwater don't want you all in," Smoke informed the crowd.
And so Saltman and Wildwater became profoundly unpopular. "Now, how are we going to do it?" Smoke asked. "Shorty and I ought to keep control. We discovered this townsite."
"That's right," many cried. "It's only fair."
3/5 to us," Smoke suggested, "and you fellas come in for 2/5, and you've got to pay for your shares."
10 cents on the dollar was a cry.
"No, sir," Smoke sneered. "You fellas have got to be reasonable. 10 cents on the dollar will help start things. You buy 2/5 of the stock, $100 par at $10. That's the best I can do."
"No big capitalization,"
a voice called out, and it was the collective mind of the crowd. "There's about 5,000 of you, which will make 5,000 shares," Smoke worked the problem aloud, "and 5,000 is 2/5 of 12,500. Therefore, the Tralee Townsite Company is capitalized for $1,250,000. There being 12,500 shares, 100 par, you fellows buying 5,000 of them at $10 apiece, and I don't care if you accept it or not. And I call you all to witness that you're forcing me against my will." A committee was formed and the organization of the Tralee Townsite Company effected. The committee, by a fire on the ice at the foot of the slide, issued a receipt to each stampeder in return for $10 in dust duly weighed on 24 gold scales which were brought from Dawson. By twilight the work was accomplished, and Tralee was deserted. Smoke and Shorty ate supper in the cabin, and chuckled at the list of shareholders, 4,874 strong, and at the gold sacks, which they knew contained approximately $48,740.
"But you haven't finished yet," Shorty objected.
"He'll be here," Smoke said with conviction. "He's a born gambler, and when Breck whispers the tip to him not even heart disease would stop him." Within the hour came a knock at the door, and Wildwater entered, followed by Bill Saltman.
"But suppose I want to vote 1,200 shares," Wildwater was arguing half an hour later. "With the other 5,000 sold today, it would make only 6,200 shares. That'd leave you and Shorty with 6,300. You'd still control." "But what do you want with all that of a townsite?" Shorty asked.
"You can answer that better than me," Wildwater replied. His gaze drifted over the blanket-draped windlass. "But Bill wants some," Smoke said, "and we simply won't part with more than 500 shares."
"How much have you got to invest?" Wildwater asked Saltman.
"Oh, say 5,000. Wildwater, Smoke went on in the same complaining voice, if I didn't know you so well I wouldn't sell you a single share. And anyway, Shorty and I won't part with more than 500, and they'll cost you $50 apiece. That's the last word, and if you don't like it, good night. Bill can take 100, and you can have the other 400. Next day, Dawson began its laugh. It started early in the morning, when Smoke went to the bulletin board outside the AC Company store and tacked up a notice. Men gathered and were reading. Soon the bulletin board was crowded by hundreds who could not get near enough to read. Then a reader was appointed, and there were numbers of men who stood in the snow and heard it read several times in order to memorize it. The Tralee Townsite Company keeps its accounts on the wall. This is its first account and its last. Any shareholder who objects to donating $10 to the Dawson General Hospital may obtain his $10 on personal application to Wildwater Charlie, or will obtain it on application to Smoke Bellew. Monies received and disbursed. From 4,874 shares at $10 per share, 48,740. To Dwight Sanderson, for townsite of Tralee, $10,000. To incidental expenses, powder, drills, windlass, cold commissioner's office, etc., $1,000. To Dawson General Hospital, $37,740. Total, $48,740. From Bill Saltman for 100 shares privately, purchased at $50, $5,000. From Wildwater Charlie for 400 shares privately purchased at $50, $20,000. To Bill Saltman in recognition of services as volunteer stampede promoter, $5,000. To Dawson General Hospital, $3,000. To Smoke Bellew and Jack Short, balance in full on egg deal and morally owing, $17,000. Total, $25,000. Shares remaining to account for 7,126. These shares, held by Smoke Bellew and Jack Short, value nil, may be obtained gratis, for the asking, by any and all residents of Dawson desiring to change of domicile to the peace and solitude of the town of Tralee. Bracket, note, peace and solitude always guaranteed in town of Tralee. Signed, Smoke Bellew, President. Signed, Jack Short, Secretary.